There we go. Good evening, everybody. So I told a couple of people that I was having this guy on, and a lot of you were very excited. And it's a very funny story because I looked into the Quran around about when was it? October 2022 it was. And I read the Quran, and the reason I never took my Shahada for I think it was 6 months after was because it wasn't in the Quran. And then when I started, going to the masjids and all that, I was confronted with a lot of stuff that I was not particularly well prefaced in. And a guy sent me a link to a video of Sam's, and I watched every single video he's posted. I've actually got, and we'll leave the links in the description. I've got his full Quran translation. You could probably hit someone over the head with this and kill them. It's enormous. It's full of annotations.
It is dual purpose.
It is dual purpose. As they're trying to de-arm men around the world, that's probably the best bet you've got legally for self-defense. A few more books, we'll talk about them, and I'll let Sam talk about them because it's his work, not mine. But if you have an open mind and you're willing to hear a logical opinion and not just pathologically name call and point fingers and spiral, you're definitely going to enjoy this. So we'll let Sam give himself a brief introduction regarding his works, how he came to the Quran, how he looked at it from an objective standpoint and not a predetermined pre-concluded ideas to what it meant, and what the Quran means to him, how it affects his life, and how he deals with the social pressures he gets for taking the book as it is, which it seems insane, but if you believe that the Quran is the full and complete revelation from God, you're called a kafir. So it's a crazy world we live in, but I'll let you introduce yourself for 5-10 minutes or however long you need, and let everybody know your side of the story.
Okay, well, I mean, there's a lot there. I'll do my best. My name is Sam Gerrans. I'm English. I'm 56 years old. I happen to live in Russia, although that's just sort of come to pass sort of historically. I'm from a middle class family in the UK. I grew up in Suffolk, which if you look at the UK and think of it as a pregnant woman, it's the sort of the pregnant bit. That's East Anglia. That's where I grew up. I happen to have a degree in Russian language and literature. I was interested in Russian. From a sort of religious point of view, I've come to the view that people are essentially born either believers or non-believers. I don't have this idea that you can really argue, to convince somebody to believe in God or not believe in God. The analogy that I use is of those magic eye pictures. If you've ever seen those magic eye pictures where they're just little dots, thousands and millions of dots. Yeah. And then some people can see, if you look, it turns into Marilyn Monroe or the Leaning Tower of Pisa or whatever it is. But some people can't see that. And so when people say to me they don't believe in God, I believe them. I don't think they're lying to me. I mean, I have to assume that they're telling me the truth. So, but they tell me they see dots. Well, I see dots too. But I also see the Leaning Tower of Pisa. And I'd be lying to say that I don't. Just as they'd be lying to say that they do. So I tend to, I mean, just as an aside, I tend to respect people who are openly atheistic or, openly agnostic. From a Quranic point of view, as I see it, is the people who say that they believe in God but don't. These are the really more dangerous people. I think you can only really be sincere to your, if thou canst to thine own self be true, as it were. So anyway, I'll try to condense some of this. Although I was not brought up in a Christian family, I was brought up in a Christian culture in the sort of degrading Anglican church culture of the United Kingdom of the 1970s. But even though it was degrading as I was growing up, I'm very grateful that I did grow up in that culture. We have to some extent, a culture of sola scriptura, of sort of taking the scripture as a complete data set, to use a sort of more technical term. And so at the age of about 17, I began to read the Bible, because growing up, I grew up in what I call it disparagingly a libtard environment. You see, I mean, I've got a few years on you, but when I was growing up, leftism was the new kid on the block. It was supposed to be the thing. It was sort of in opposition, as it were, and it could make whatever claims it liked because it didn't have to prove any of them. But what we found now is we're not guessing anymore. We've seen what it grows into. It grows into something which wants to inculcate your children into the wonders of sodomy, and is basically demonic. So we're not guessing anymore. You know, that whole thing about burn your bra and men are oppressive, it had a sort of a validity at some point going back, or at least it potentially did. But now we've seen what it grows into, and I could see easily growing up that the middle class, it's not just anything wrong with being middle class, but you see, when you come from the kind of background that I come from, it's supposed to be you essentially agree with the conclusions of liberalism without ever questioning any of its premises. So when we get into, you know, questions of Islam and the Quran, so on, I've seen it all before because I grew up in it. In fact, I think there's a great correlation, a natural correlation between what I call brand Islam on the one hand, which assumes its conclusions and calls you names and attacks you if you don't accept those conclusions, and what I call libtardism, you know, this sort of psychotic liberalism. They're actually very similar, strangely. They're natural bedfellows. Anyway, leaving all of that to one side, I read the Bible, and it was the first time, I was about 17, maybe age 17, I think, and it was the first time that I began to find some sort of, the word in Russian is отклик, like a response and a kind of echo to what I was already built as, which is as a believer. And I thought, okay, I mean, I was very young, all right? I thought, okay, if this is it, okay, I'll follow this. And I found myself in a Christian group, and I became a Christian missionary for 2 years, between about 17 and 19, maybe 20, something like that. And over that period, I was sort of forming more as a man, as you know, with some intellectual capacity. And I just found that they couldn't answer my questions. And a lot of those questions really revolve around the Apostle Paul, whom I reject in total.
Completely.
But even so, even leaving Paul out of the equation, the Gospels are contradictory. I mean, you've got the first three synoptic Gospels, which seem to be retellings of a same sort of type of narrative. And then you've got, you know, the kind of Nirvana, surfer guy, dope smoking Gospel of St. John. I've got nothing against St. John. It's a Gnostic story, but the claim is that, you know, I am the way, the truth, and the life. No man cometh unto the Father but by me. Well, okay, if you're saying that means that you are the Son of God, and by Son of God, what you mean is what we understand to mean by Son, not what you know, Neoplatonists might have understood by it. But if you're saying that that's the claim, well, then why didn't he mention it in the first three Gospels? It's a big miss, if you ask me. You know, you could leave out some of the minor details, perhaps, you know, whether you I don't know, the sacraments or whatever it is. But if you happen to be the Son of God, I think it should be one of the first things, you know, when you meet someone. Hello, I'm Jesus. I'm the Son of God. Let's get that straight. That should be there, but it's not there. But you're expected in certain Christian backgrounds to treat it as though it were there. And eventually, I came to a point where I realized that this is untenable. And I left, and I stopped doing that and went to university and did some other things instead. And it's not that I put religion on the back burner, but I felt somewhat foolish. I'll be honest with you. I felt that I felt foolish. I felt that I'd been tricked, and I made a very strong sort of pact with myself that I would never do that again. It doesn't mean that I would never, you know, I was done with God or anything like that. I wasn't going to allow myself to be manipulated in this way. And let's face it, religions, and I include within religion materialism, this sort of, you know, YOLOism, hedonism, democracy, libtardism. These are religions, but so are brand Islam and brand Christianity and all the other brands. They are religions, and I don't say that they're necessarily like, I don't know, sort of de facto wrong, but there's a lot of trickery in this world, and there are some clever men who thought things through. And I think that all a man can really do is answer for himself, because ultimately that's what we all have to do. And so, to my mind, that's the main distinction between a man and anything that isn't a man, is you take responsibility. So I took responsibility for myself, and I read a lot. I thought a lot. I went to university. I made a lot of what they call mistakes, all the rest of it. But all the time, I default back to the way that I'm created, and I'm created to believe in God. This is me. Some people are created not to. That's them. Okay, you do you. But me, this is me. And so I remember somebody gave me a Quran. I was walking down Kilburn High Street. In fact, I've told this story quite recently. When I was about 25, 26, can't remember exactly. And just on the spur of a moment, I'm a reader, I've always read. And I went into this bookshop. It was a Muslim bookshop. And I got talking to the guy there. And he, after all the Christians that I dealt with, and I'm not here to bash Christians, there's nothing to do with that, but his presentation was so different to what I've been used to with this sort of glad handing, sort of manipulation.
Salesmanship sort of thing.
Yeah, kind of, and it is, let's face it, it is sales of Christianity, where it's all really kind of like a bit icky and a bit fake and a bit all of that. He was the absolute opposite. He seemed not to care at all. Quite frankly, which was really refreshing. And we had a bit of a talk, and he got a bit hot under the collar when I called them Mohammedans. He went, no, we're not Mohammedans. We're not Mohammedans. We're Muslims. So, whatever, you call yourself what you like. I don't care. But anyway, he gave me a copy. He said, will you? He kind of held on to it. He said, will you read this? I said, yes, I would read it. I will. I'm not promising to read it right now, but I probably will read it. Thank you very much. Clearly he was in the sales business ultimately. So I took it and I read it, but only a few years later, because I knew I wasn't ready to read it. I knew that about myself at that time. So when I was about 30, I read it. And I'll tell you what impressed me. A couple of things impressed me about it. It wasn't like I read the Quran and the scales fell from my eyes and alhamdulillah, there I was, now. No, it was nothing like that. I'm a reader. I considered its contents. And some of its stylistics, I have to say, seem a bit, at first, when you first engage with it, and I think this is partly a problem with the understanding that they overlay upon this. It can seem a bit jumpy, jump cutty sort of. I mean, we're used to that. Some YouTube videos look a bit like that. But it was some of the things within page, by page 2 or 3 of Al-Baqarah, I had an answer to something that I'd never been able to get an answer from in Christianity. Yeah, faith and works. Is it faith? Is it works? I mean, if Jesus saves me, then I have a get out of jail free card, right? I can just do exactly what I want. But no, you can't. Well, which is it? Is it this or is it that? Yeah. And they can't really answer, because what you've got is you've got a 3-meter bed and a 2-meter blanket, and you can seem to cover this bed as long as you don't want to cover it all at the same time. Because if you want to cover it all at the same time, what you end up with is Jesus as what he said he was, which is actually a prophet, and then you don't have a problem. But then why Christianity? So they're locked into this thing, and I could see that, and that's their problem. I'm not here to solve their problems. I'm here to solve my problems. So that impressed me. It says, whoso believeth in God in the last day and doeth good works, he hath his reward. And I was like, well, that's pretty straightforward. It's not ecumenical. It's not kind of ecumenical. It's not saying all religions are the same. It's very clear. Belief in God and the last day, these two things, in fact. If you don't believe in Judgment Day, you're not a believer. It's as clear as that. And does good works, he has his reward. And more than that, we find in the Quran that for every good deed we get 10, and for every bad deed there's just the 1. So it's if you want a good investment, this is the best investment. So
can I just interject really quickly? I don't mean to interrupt, but it's interesting because I've always thought with the faith and works thing, and I've always pointed this out to Christians and Muslims who think just having faith is going to get them passed on the day of judgment. And you look at what the Quran constitutes that faith is belief in God and in the last day. And I go, well, when you look at Shaitan or Satan, he believes in God and he believes in the last day. Does that mean that when you look through the Quran, he asks for respite from God, he asks for consent to lead them astray? So that proves to you there that just having faith in God's existence and the last day does not constitute any form of saving or entering the garden and the life after. So I agree with you. That was one of the first things with me when you look at Al-Baqarah. A very quick answer solved instantly. So yeah, continue.
Well, that I agree with you, and it's I suppose it's a human foible to wish to be special and protected on the basis of no effort whatsoever. I mean, all kinds of people have been like that through history, and it's understandable, but it's not a position you can defend Quranically. I remember after I'd been reading for a while and was interested in it, I met a chap when I lived in England. He said, I Muslim, my family's been Muslim for 400 years. I said to him, it doesn't matter what your family's been for 400 years. It matters what you do. That's what matters. And he just thought, oh, this is kafir. Walked off. That's it. That's the end of that conversation. So, but I mean, to a couple of other things which really spoke to me when I was reading this. Some things which are actually, from a point of view of translation, impossible to get wrong, which are things like the marriage and divorce laws. I just absolutely got it, having grown up in a delusional Western society. I'm not talking about what Muslims do. I'm talking about what this book says. It just made sense to me. And then when we get through to the Tawheed, the unity of God, it's very simple. Say God, He's one, and this is very simple. And so it's not just that its simplicity necessarily its primary qualification, but it kind of coalesces, or kind of it found an echo in what was already in me. So I was impressed, and I read the whole thing through once. In Russian, shopetom, like in a half whisper. I had to hear these words as I was doing it. And then I read it again, like immediately. And I had a job. I was coming home from work and just locking myself away and just reading. I read it very, very carefully because I wanted to be sure. I'd been once bitten, twice shy, and I wanted to be sure. I wasn't going to jump on board with this. And let's face it, I'm a white English guy. I'm a Celt by my sort of genetics. I come from a great, background. I'm proud of my history. I'm proud of my race. I'm proud of my people. I've no reason to sort of make common cause, as it were, with any other people. I respect other points of view, but I come from where I come from. But the truth matters to me, and it actually really does matter. So I read it again very carefully, and what I found when I read it was, and I'd seen this before, even in translation. I was reading the Abdul Yusuf Ali translation, which is not a bad translation, but it's a kind of King James Bible-esque presentation of Sunni middle of the road orthodoxy. That's, I think, is a fair assessment of what it is. And as you're reading, and as you read any translation generally, what I found is you come across, as you're reading, makes sense. And then you can feel there's a tension there. Now, it's not me as a modern trying to apply my 21st century kind of worldview onto this and finding it lacking. It was that there was a break in the narrative. I have a degree in Russian language and literature, and I'm emphasizing here literature. I read widely literature, so I'm used to, like, professionally reading texts and absorbing them and, as it were, analyzing them. I could feel these breaks, and I noticed that these breaks occurred, not always, but generally speaking, whenever it got to the bit where there was some kind of point of contact between this book and what they call Islam. And by Islam here, there are many Islams. It depends what you're really talking about. They generally, people try to pretend it's this one monolithic thing. Well, that's not true. There's a whole smorgasbord of Islams here. But what I'm talking about here is what mainly people agree upon, and although not all do, that there are these 5 pillars. So when it came down to the pillars thing, and by pillars, there's the 5 daily prayers, and paying this 2.5% of your income in zakat, or whatever it is, and the pilgrimage and all the rest of it, I found that this was the point where things started to break, and most people won't notice it. And what I found with most of the traditional Muslims that I talked to, they didn't care. They actually didn't care about any of this. Oh, well, whatever, inshallah. I do care. Firstly, I've made a bloody fool of myself, excuse my French, but I had done, and I felt that. And I felt that I had to make some sort of reparations. For myself, I needed to do this, and also I've got the brains. I don't mean to sound arrogant, but I want to know, and I need to know. It's important to me. So what I did was I thought, how can you come to this? Now the Quran makes some claims about itself. It claims to be from God. It claims to be perfect. It claims that He will protect it, not mullahs, not hadiths, not sahih, this type of no. It says that God will preserve it. He will preserve it. Now either these things are true or they're not. And also it challenges you, unlike the kind of Christianity that I experienced, where it was best to kind of cover your eyes and sort of hope it was all true. It challenges you to come to it, to question it, and it says that people reject this Quran without having understood even 1/10 of it. Not that they have understood 1/10 of it; they haven't even understood 1/10 of it. And I thought, I didn't go into this thinking, I'm going to show these Muslims, it wasn't like that at all. I thought, who's done this work? I'm a reader, see, so I looked around, who has done the work that the Quran claims, is challenging you to do. And what I found, there are people who've done interesting work. I'm not taking that away, but I didn't find anybody who'd done this. And so I thought, oh no, it means I'm going to have to do it. I don't feel qualified to do that. I don't. It wasn't that I went into it, here we are. Sort of the great white, hope of Islam. No, it wasn't like that at all for me. I just got frustrated with this kind of. I don't want to be rude. I wasn't satisfied with what I was getting. It seems. What I found when I met Muslims was that explained to me why this isn't a great civilization anymore. Because when I read this book, I thought whoever follows this book will have a great civilization. And then I thought, well, why is the Islamic world in such a mess? And now I know, because they practice the same patterns of mind, of assumed conclusions and closed-minded and adamantine refusal to actually think, that I get in my own culture. I'd seen it all before. I'd seen it in Christianity. On a quick aside, the Quran says when the man gets to 40, he should pray and dedicate his life to God. I think the reason why that's the case is because by the time you get to 40, you've seen everything. You've seen, there are only a certain number of patterns and they repeat. So by the time you get
Marcus Aurelius said that, didn't he?
Is that right?
Meditations. I think he did.
It's an excellent book. I'm
a
big fan of Marcus Aurelius and Stoicism in general. So you are responsible now. And so I got to a point where I felt responsible. So what I did was I taught, because I had a linguistic background, I wasn't intimidated by Arabic. And I learnt to read classical Arabic with understanding. It took a while, but after Russian, it was, once you've, it's a bit like being a taxi driver. Once you've been a taxi driver in one city, you know how to learn another city. It'll have a university, it'll have a ring road, it'll have certain things that you kind of know what to look for. And you also learn to deal with ambiguity. You learn to understand that, okay, although I don't know all of this, but yet I know it's going to have these kind of features, and you're just basically filling in those holes. So I learned that because I had to get past these mullahs. I had to get, maybe I'm not being very kind, but I had to get past the gatekeepers of this religion. And what they have is a version, and this is the version. And this version wasn't giving me the answers, because were their version true, and obviously there are lots of different versions, I wouldn't be interested in it. There are translations of the Quran, Hilali and Khan translation, for example. If that's what the Quran actually meant, my engagement with it would have lasted like nothing. That would be it. But that isn't quite clearly what it means. And I think that I'd like to hit this point because it is important and central to my work. What I realized was with these keywords, and I'll give an example, and I've made this, it's in my work, and I sort of describe it there. Arabic isn't a holy language. Clearly, some of the some of the Quranic text is translated because, did Moses speak Arabic? I don't know. Did these people speak Arabic? Are we saying they all spoke Arabic? Is that the claim? The Jews make their claims about the Torah, that it's a holy language. Who knows? I'm not interested in any of that. But what I needed to do was get past it and get to the actual language. And what is definitely true is that the very nature of Arabic itself, given that it's based on usually trilateral roots, means that it gives you a certain access to what's going on. Reading it in the Arabic, I'll give you an example in English. If we say that there's a root in English, HSP, we have words like hospitable and hospice, hospital. We can feel that these things are related. Well, Arabic is very much like that. And once you've learned a certain number of patterns and connections, it becomes obvious what's going on. Now, if I say to you, okay, there's another word, it's called hospitate, and it means give us 2.5% of your wealth every year. Well, right there, okay, I have a question. But if you have a question within this kind of framework, then you're just a bad person. They've got some names to call. See, I come from the West.
It's ad hominem. Ad hominem.
Absolutely.
That's all it is.
You're an anti-Semite, a homophobe. You're whatever the word is they use to shut you down, a sexist, a racist. Who knows? I'll probably get you deplatformed or demonetized or something with those.
I've already had way worse than that. There's a reason I left the UK.
Okay. I'd like to get into that if we have time.
Yeah, sure.
So I realized, and that the Quran claims to be, to put it in modern parlance, a closed data set, a complete data set. Now, I happen to have, I'm not a very kind of techie guy exactly, but I have worked close with and lots of very technically capable people, and I have to understand what they do in order to explain it to people who don't know anything about it. So I've been a kind of an interface in my life, and I'm a super user of computers without being like a programmer or anything like that. So I understand how logic works to some extent. So if you've got if this is a complete data set, and if the postulates that God gave it is correct, and it is susceptible to reason, then let's take that as my basis. Not this religion made up, and we're trying to sort of cram. I think the analogy I use is to sort of a hand and a glove will fit together in a way that a glove and that same glove and your foot will never fit together. So let's just. And it sounds really arrogant because you're supposed to kind of, well, who are you, brother? Who are you? Who do you think you are? And I agree with all of that. You're absolutely right, but your answers don't make any sense to me. And in the absence of those, you know what? I'm going to just try for myself because I feel like I have a responsibility to do this. Anyway, I read a lot. I read a lot of kind of disparate stuff, very different sort of bits and pieces. And I came across an article about a chap called Bedřich Hrozný, who was a Czech linguist who was he was given the unenviable task of deciphering the Hittite libraries, which and I think this was about the turn of the 20th century, pre-computers, pre all of that. So you had a library written in cuneiform, which is an alphabet which we could read because other people wrote in it, but a language which was completely unknown. And what he did was he did this very, very clever, you should think incredibly tedious thing, which is he went through all of this library and looked for the most oft recurring word. And the reason why he did that was because he reasoned, well, the Hittites were an agrarian society. So this word has got to mean bread or grain. And he did this. And he was right. It did mean that. And now he had a sort of a Rosetta Stone from which he could then expand, given his vast knowledge of languages and all the rest of it. I thought, I'm taking that. That's a really good idea. And I based my hermeneutic process somewhat on this. And I call it pantextual analysis. So I'll give you an example. Let's take, for example, a very emotive word for the traditionalist Muslim. I'm not here to attack traditionalist Muslims at all. I think there are many righteous traditionalist Muslims, just I think there are many righteous Christians and the rest of it. I'm just saying I want an answer that makes sense to me. Me. I answer for me, okay? If your version and your culture and all the rest of it's all fine for you, great. Good for you. God bless you. But it doesn't make any sense to me. I actually want an answer. And again, given the mistakes that I'd made, I kind of felt that I obliged to do the work. So let's
Can I
take the
interject
word.
just once again? Just wanted to quickly add a
Interject
point.
away.
Thank you. But it's interesting, and this is how, because you reason with people, and actually, you're talking about everything today is kind of like just a cult in a different form.
Sure.
There's kind of like when you oppose somebody's beliefs with a logical answer which makes sense. It's like the gaslighting is their god, and then their 12 apostles are circular reasoning, appeal to authority, ad hominem, appeal to and you see this with everything. Like I'll post a video and I'll say, okay, there was a claim on a 25,000-mile circumference around the ball. There was an 8 inches per mile squared. Here's a P900 camera. There's no curve, and they never go, oh, that's interesting. They just attack. And what I would say to that is, because I've had the same, where people, everyone does it, like Christianity does it. You have the science religion does it, and Islam. Like, so one of the first things was the Quran states don't divide into sects. And then you take your Shahada and are you Salafi, Wahhabi, Shia, Sunni? And I go, okay, well, that doesn't make sense. And then it also says you will only be held accountable for what you did on the day of judgment. And,
Right.
and the shaitan will say he only called you and you answered his call.
Yeah.
So when people get angry at us for going, what you're saying doesn't make sense, like, would you like us to lie? Because it's not that we're coming at this from a predetermined background, but we're definitely disagreeing with what the majorative stance is. If you read, if the Quran claims it's complete and from God, and then you follow other stuff, that therefore means the Quran isn't complete, and as collateral, it means that it can't be from God because he's a liar, or if he is God, he's not worthy of worship. So would you like us to lie? Like, it's not that we're coming at it from a combative standpoint, or that we're particularly really even interested in swaying people's opinions, because I think a lot of times it comes from a standpoint of fear. When, like, I think you mentioned this on the Side Mirza thing, when you look at, and I always go back to the globe heliocentric thing, because it's just, for me, it's the most preposterous thing. Once that breaks,
Yep.
you have to adopt a new mindset, which is willing to accompany that level of lying. So you have to now adopt a new worldview, which understands that you've been lied to that big a degree.
Yes.
And I think a lot of times when people are confronted with this information, we're not trying to, like, necessarily, and you've said this in a bunch of videos, and I say it as well, we're not trying to necessarily rip apart your belief structure or how you've set up your family or your culture. It's just, when you read a book and it says it's perfect and it's from God, and then you trust your eternal soul based on extraneous stuff, which really not only doesn't concord with the Quran, but completely and utterly contradicts it in terms of the narrative and how you operate. So I just want to interject with that, is that before people just get angry, do you want us to lie? Because if we were liars to begin with, we would have went, oh yes, when Jesus said, beware of false prophets who come, especially when they're in the desert or on the road to war, and then Paul sees Jesus after he said there'd be no more apostles, and met him with no witnesses in a desert on the road to kill Christians. If we were liars, we would never have got past that point. So the same logical pattern that we're applying to each thing is why we even got to the Quran. So don't just get angry, because it's not that we have bad intentions. It's just, do you want us to lie? It just is what it is. Anyway, that's all I wanted to say.
Well, I think that on that, the conclusion that I've come to is that, and most people, and it's probably 19 out of 20, let me put it this way. The Chinese, when they took American prisoners, I think it was in the Korean War, they discovered that they only actually had to watch one prisoner in 20. And so they had all these prisoners, thousands and thousands of them, and it's time intensive to guard people. But they discovered that, and this was connected with their process of re-education and brainwashing, that once they identified one man in 20 who was essentially independent thinker, and they get those people together and put them in a group and guard those people, guard those men. All the 19s out of 20s, like the vast majority, they could basically let them do what they wanted because they would never do anything. So the unpleasant truth of it is that actually only about 1 in 20 is capable of actual independent thought. Now, that sounds like what I'm saying is that this is an intelligence issue. It isn't an intelligence issue. It's something else. It's the ability to think for oneself. And my view currently is that if everybody were like me, society wouldn't work, because let's say you're a tram driver, sitting there, well, from an ontological point of view, is it really necessary from, in the third and fourth heavens that this tram drives? No. I don't know if you've ever seen the wonderful Monty Python skit where they've got all the philosophers playing football. You may be a bit young to have caught that, but look it up if you have time. And they've got Wittgenstein and Socrates, pondering about the football. Should we kick the ball? And then eventually they score a goal. It's a wonderful sketch. If everybody was like this, society wouldn't work. Most people are followers, and I'm fine with that. We have leaders. We have an elite. It's a pyramidal structure, and I'm actually fine with that. There's no way out of that one. It's just how things are actually designed. The whole kind of flat structure of democracy where people are fungible, this is nonsense. This is made up.
Yeah. You see
this
that now with I know that they've clearly spun the narrative, and now like, for example, I remember 3 years ago when if you didn't want to put a gag around your face and let another man tell your wife to put a gag on, you couldn't go see Gran and you wanted her to die. And now those same people that wanted you in a prison cell for not injecting yourself with heavy metals, they are now in Instagram and YouTube comments going, "Oh well, we all knew that the government, Snowvid 91 was a beta test for the new." And I'm like, well, during the time, it's easy saying that now, but during the time you were a nut job who wanted people who didn't inject themselves with XYZ in jail. And you're seeing now that there's this kind of push. And I've wondered, when you look at the palace time, I'm going to have to vague my language a bit for strike reasons. When you look at the palace time and Israel conflict, you look at these companies like Reuters, BBC, they're all owned by Israel institutions and companies, and the whole central banking thing's backed by it. So I go, why are they now publicizing how bad the genoslide is over there? There has to be an ulterior motive. It's been going on for 75 years. Why are they now putting it in the media? And I think there's this big push now where they're trying to get people to topple over their own government, so then they can bring in a solution, which would be, the United Nations with their flat Earth logo. They would come in, and that you've created the problem to the solution. And I go, you people don't understand. Yes, there will always be, and you've said this, it's like a pyramid. There will always be a vacuum of power at the top. And if you overthrow your own rulers, you're not going to get anyone better typically. Like look at Mexico. You're just going to get a cartel, and you pay 20% tax now, or 60, then 20% VAT is worse than like the Pharaoh in Egypt. But you'll just have people waiting at your house, and they'll have a machete, and they'll go, if you don't give us $20 a day, we'll just take your house off you. Like, you're always going to have power at the top. There's a power vacuum. It's nature abhors a vacuum. There's always going to be people there. So when people complain about, like, Jacob Rothschild died recently, and people are like, oh, burn in hell. I'm like, well, it's the same as the Quran. The Quran says Shaitan will only call you. The reason he rebelled is because he was given authority below you, which means he needs your consent to drag you down.
Yes.
So when you look at these guys, no one ever put a gun to your head and said, you're now taking a loan with interest. You're now going to watch pornography. You're now going to cheat on your wife. You did it to yourself. Like if the Rothschilds are lending out the money, they need someone to take the loan. So this idea that they are doing it to you is a victim mindset, which will create, that sprouting out, and then problem, they create the solution, blah, 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 blah. So yeah, I'm glad you mentioned that, because I can see that festering in everybody now, that they've just 1 minute went from everything the state says, do it. If your gran is dying, don't see her because the sniffle. And now they've just went the whole other way, and they're like, oh yes, the government is bad, they're doing it to us. I'm like, just stop being pathological and think, you know what I mean?
Well,
so, yeah.
I agree with most of that, except for the last bit. I don't think most people will think, and I don't expect them to. I'm not playing a numbers game. I don't believe in democracy. I don't believe in the idea that everyone's going to wake up. And no, of course not. As I've said before, I'm sure you've heard me say that, this idea that when enough people wake up, who's giving you this idea? Oh, well, it'll be the 0.0000001%. Because the one thing they can be absolutely certain of is that most people are, what I've said about only one in 20 can think and all the rest of it, they know this. They've studied us very well, and they're right. The thing about the ruling elites, in my view, is their analysis is generally correct. It's my issue is not that they should be replaced by iPhone wielding 19-year-olds in a hoodie. No, it's that they've gone off the plantation, off the reservation rather of their obligation to practice noblesse oblige. They are better. They are rulers. They do rule. And it's right that they should, because, Joe Blow, he isn't capable. He's not qualified. Now, people would say, "Oh, don't you believe in democracy?" No, of course not. It's fairy tales for silly children. It really is. I mean, ultimately, and nor does anybody else. I mean, if are we going to say that if we're going to play football, that I and Ronaldo are somehow comparable because we've both got two legs? Yeah, I've got back problems. I tell you, this isn't going to go well. And it wouldn't even take Ronaldo. I mean, any 12-year-old physically fit 14-year-old is going to run circles around me. So we don't believe in this. Let's say take getting on an aeroplane. I don't want to vote about who's going to fly this plane. I'm not interested in the dinner lady's opinion. She can just sit down, shut up, and let the guy, the German with the 10,000 hours flying experience, get on with getting us to the next airport, please. So there are cases where we say that this isn't true. And we accept that there is such a thing as excellence and inherent value. Value is the thing that I think that they really hate. That's what I notice about this. What they really dislike, and I'm sort of jumping around a bit, but if you look at the window dressing people, the people like Johnson and Sunak and Biden and all of these people, and van der Leyen, if you look at these people, the kind of people they've got for you to look at, how mediocre they are. And I think that this is a policy. They choose their primary qualifications are kind of supine. They're pusillanimous. They're completely compliant, and they're mediocre. And you think to yourself, well, perhaps, what if they were really talented? Well, I think the really talented people realize that in order to get ahead, if you're going to, go that route, you have to pretend to be those other things. Perhaps there are a few actually talented people there who understand that that's how to get ahead. Because because they want to give, the masses leaders like them. And
I have an interesting theory on them. Can I give you my theory on it?
Sure.
Because my perspective shifted, and I'm not. You'll know that people can get stuck. I've listened to every single video you've made, pretty much. I think I've always said there's 3 guys I've ever met, or not met, but came across that I respect as a man, and you're one of them. You were the one I didn't name because I didn't want people in my inbox going, "Oh, cover, you go kill yourself." But and one of the things that shifted in my mind was when I started to understand notice of liability. So when you take, for example, the 7-Eleven was an inside job, and you sit there and you go, okay, so two planes took down 3 buildings. The buildings fell faster than free fall speed.
Sorry, 9/11. Not 7/11.
Yeah. But I was just saying that in case I got striked or something.
I see. I'm sorry. I know. Now I've done messed it all up.
Don't worry about it. Yeah, but when the 911 was an inside 7-Eleven.
Sorry, I was just slow on the uptake.
You're fine. I do that. You might, in case you listen to me talk, and then I'm making sense, and I say something.
No. I realized
or something.
I realized you were doing it before, but I just thought, you've been shopping too much or something.
Well, what I was going to say is, if you look at there's a woman, people can go look this up. Judy Wood. She wrote a book on where did the towers go. It got banned off Amazon, but you can find PDFs and presentations online. And you look at it, it falls faster than the speed of free fall. And I'm not going to go down a completely big rabbit hole. I'm not on the gravity spinning ball. I'm on the ether model, where if you look at all the cathedrals in the past, they were all pulling electricity, blah, 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 blah. I think it was something to do with like Tesla technology, where you know, like if an opera singer sings at a certain pitch
Sure.
frequency, a glass will shatter next to her. I think that's probably something like that they did. But I always thought, okay, why, if they own all the media and the infrastructure and all this stuff, why would they not just take that three uh, tower? Why would they not make it two and two? And 9/11 is a rabble. I mean, if you look at to where the parts went, they went to a scrapyard called Fresh Kill Scrapyard, which opened and closed on the same day, and then got shipped to Shanghai
Sure.
or Wuhan, China. Like people don't look
Sure.
into this stuff, but
Sure.
I always
Sure.
wondered why do they just leave it in plain sight? And I thought for a while it was, you know, they were laughing at you, they were mocking you, they were like, "Oh, you dumb Jeet goyim." Blah, blah. But then you made an analogy, and it was actually very recently that this kind of snapped in my head. And we'll go on to the warning the elite. But you said when you're engaging with the police, they make a definitive statement. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law, and that is the consent, the notice of liability. That now the rules of the game have changed. So therefore, it's like a parking ticket. Here's the best analogy I could make. If you go into a car park and there isn't a sufficient notice of liability, there's no sign saying this is a paid car park, and you go in and they try fine you, you can take that to a court of law and get it thrown out because there's no notice of liability. They have to have the sign telling you paid car park. So you'll understand this. I really don't think politicians really do anything. My thinking behind it is, if you look at the United Kingdom right now, okay, so Scotland is ruled. Scotland's prime minister is a Pakistani. The mayor of London is a Pakistani. The prime minister of England is an Indian. The prime minister of Ireland is an openly self-proclaimed sodomite. I think the whole reason they do that, because obviously it doesn't really matter. Like if you look at 2020 to 2022, you had right wing versus left wing, but they all shut down for Snowvid 91. They all closed down. It's a Ponzi scheme. So I think the reason they do that is it's a notice of liability to go, you're conquered. Look,
Sure.
you're
Sure.
an ethnically white European. Every single person who's in charge of you, they're not elected, they're selected.
Of
Everybody we've
course.
selected is not from here. It's to prove to you this is your notice of liability that you have been conquered. And if you stay, it's your own prerogative. That's
Yeah,
just
absolutely.
what I think.
Which is why I left, and I expect that's
Yep.
why you left. I mean, you know, talent will leave because you know, you're going to stay and pay for your own ethnic cleansing, and not to mention what they're doing to your children. I don't mind who holds whichever positions. It's not a racial position for me exactly, but it's quite clearly that what's happened to me, and obviously we're jumping around a little bit, but it seems to me that after the Second World War, after my grandfather's generation went out and laid down their lives in millions to fight that war, ostensibly against Nazism. Sorry, probably weren't allowed to say that either. And then what happened was they then decided to treat the British public, I'm talking about real British people, actually British people, who'd fought that war and made huge sacrifices, as though we'd had this conversation. And the conversation we never had went something like this. We white people are evil, and we're going to destroy ourselves at our own expense and denigrate our past, our history, and all the rest of it, because that's what we deserve for some reason never been discussed. And we'd all agreed, yes, we'd like to pay for that project. What a great thing to do. And then after that, anybody who's got anything to say about it is just evil. Now, if that's the conversation that was never had, but they treat people, again, I'm talking about assumed conclusions, as though that had been the conversation. And I know people whose families were destroyed in that war, who laid down their lives, who made the ultimate sacrifice to their own people. And to then turn around and do this to mainly the working classes, to be perfectly fair about it, whose jobs were then taken away, and to treat them as if they're somehow not really very pleasant people. There's something wrong, again, something wrong with you. This is the way that libtardism works. It doesn't matter what they're arguing about. They will only discuss the subject in terms of some defect in you, because if you had no defect, you wouldn't want to talk about it. And they've got some names to call you, and as I always say, they end in ist, ite, and ob, reliably. Well, I don't accept any of those points of view, and I also see that what I see in white liberals, who are actually the demographic the only demographic that intrinsically irritates me, no other demographic does, is that the implicit in the way that they conduct themselves is the assumption that if they just humiliate themselves enough and embrace what the other, it doesn't matter what the other is, the other will be ennobled by their self-degradation. This is an essentially racist position. That would be, one example. And then we have other examples of other, racial groups that if you don't accept that they're suffering, I mean, I'm sure we understand who we're talking about here. It wasn't just,
I do.
okay, it wasn't just that nobody claims that it was quantitatively the biggest suffering in the world, because 37 million Russians were killed in that war.
And
okay,
20 million Germans.
I want to finish this point because I don't want to be just somebody to just take a little snippet on this. However, if you then don't accept that it was qualitatively the biggest suffering that ever happened, because that's all that's left after quantitatively, then somehow you are a bad person. But to say that the suffering of any people is qualitatively a superior and somehow deeper and more profound suffering than that of any other people. Let's take, for example, lots of people getting killed right now, in Israel. Then you're an ist, and I probably, and more than likely, an Ob as well. So that whole mechanism is something that I fundamentally reject. I reject that just because I've got questions and I don't want to commit suicide and don't want my entire culture destroyed, that equals you're an evil person. I may be an evil person, but you're going to have to prove it, and you're going to have to prove it on more than just sort of name calling and shaming language. And so what I saw in my own country, the immigrants, I understand, they want a better life. Fine, I understand that. That's not complicated to me. It's the white liberals that I couldn't get. And I come from this kind of background. Why do you want to commit suicide? Why is it that we have the language of Shakespeare? We have if we're talking about European culture, Mozart, Wagner, the great philosophers. We created one of the most amazing cultures that has ever existed. And in fact, we created the countries and the societies that anybody with a choice wants to go and live in. Why would you want to destroy that? Why wouldn't you want to teach other people how to do that and make their own countries great as well? I mean, it does rather irritate me. And also there's this idea of which they put about of some sort of multiculturalism, but it isn't multicultural, it's monoculture. They're destroying all cultures, because Indian culture is being destroyed, Pakistani culture is being destroyed, all these cultures are being destroyed. And if you're not in favor of creating some soup with no genetic clarity, with no racial clarity, with no historical clarity, religious clarity, cultural clarity, then what you've got is a slave caste that you can manipulate. So that's what I'm actually against. This isn't, me standing on my sort of Third Reich, soapbox. It's nothing to do with that. It's ridiculous. But that's the corner they want you painted in. If you've got any questions about how about we all commit, mass suicide here? I don't have the lemming gene. You want to jump? You jump. Go ahead. I'm not going to stop you. I'm not going to, lay my life down to try and stop you. If you, as an entire cohort, they want to throw themselves over the cliff, go ahead, be my guest. It's a long way down. I'm taking the steps. I'll have a look and see what's left when I get to the bottom. But I'm not jumping. That's just me.
And it reminds me of the just a very simple Bible verse, which is just let their dead bury their dead.
Sure, absolutely, and that's how I regard them. They are essentially dead, and because the reason is because they are. When I look at the background that I come from, 90% of the people that I knew, who all think exactly the same thing. Okay, they are basically orthodox in this libtard, psychopathic, nutty, left wing, ideals thing. What you mean? You all came to that view independently? That's interesting. But no, they didn't. They came to it through what they call osmosis. I've actually heard them boast about it. And what they mean by osmosis is that they're basically being manipulated into thinking these things, and they don't understand how or why. I understand how and why, because I've worked in that area. I know how it works. So what they are, they're kind of defining characteristic is unthinking subservience to a orthodoxy. If they'd lived in Shia, in Iran, they would have been
Iran.
Shia Muslims. Mao Zedong's China, they would have been, red communists, because that's what they do. 19 out of 20 people, going back to what we were talking about earlier, they kind of, by osmosis, they absorb the orthodoxy. And if one thing I've learned about libtards is that they intensify it. A really good person to read is Ted Kaczynski. He talks about this. He calls them leftists. They take in whatever the orthodoxy is, and then they supercharge it, because they get into a competition between each other. Who can be the only way that they can, in Russian it's called atlichad, so the only way they can kind of be attain some sort of distinction under Maslow's, they want respect and all the rest of it under his sort of
Hierarchy of needs.
hierarchy of needs. The way they achieve that is by being more insane than the next guy. That's how it works. And it sounds like I'm being rude about, well, I suppose I sort of am, but they compete in orthodoxy, they compete in compliance. And at the same time, and this is the really important thing about them, is that they think they're being progressive and revolutionary and unusual, when actually they're being
the opposite.
Uber compliant. These are precisely the people who would have been standing by the side of the road as our good friend with the moustache went past in the open-top Mercedes-Benz, raising the right hand. These are precisely the people who manned the killing fields, in Cambodia. These are precisely the people who saw people in the gulags murdered in their millions, according to Solzhenitsyn. Around over 60 million people were destroyed, were killed, ultimately by various means in the Soviet Union. It's these people. These are the people who provide the foot soldiers for all of that. And in a normal society where you have an elite who is actually righteous, they provide ballast to the society, because they're unthinking and orthodox in this evil society. They will be unthinking and orthodox in a righteous society. So I have no interest in trying to change whatever the orthodoxy is, they will adopt it. You may be absolutely certain of that. The only people that I'm interested in are the 1 in 20, 1 in 100s, because they're the only people that matter. I know this is an unusual concept, but this is a medieval concept. The medieval man did not believe in democracy. He believed in a caste system. And maybe get into that, but I'm interested in the elites, because the elites rule. They make a plan. Let's just take, for example, I'm sorry I'm going on about this, but I want to kind of hit these points. Let's take, for example, feminism. Feminism was designed. It was designed and rolled out as a policy. And so all of these women, I'm not being nasty, and I apologize ahead of time to the fine women, I'm sure some of whom are watching this right now, but as a demographic, they're very easy to manipulate. Women, by their constitution, are designed to kind of mold themselves to a man. This might sound like a radical idea, but for 10,000 years, you can take it to the bank. This is how women thought. And they knew that the way that they could, our good friend with the moustache, in his book, which he's very famous for having probably not written, but anyway, in that book, he says about propaganda. He says all the propaganda is designed is directed to the woman, because where the woman goes, the child will follow, and where the child goes, the man will follow. And so this is known. And this is a way of destroying the society. And women can be, most people can be induced to think in a particular way, but women particularly can. And for them, it's actually a survival strategy, because men go off to war and get killed, and women have to look after the children and survive and deal with whatever men come back, afterwards. This isn't a criticism of them, although it will probably be perceived as such. It's just a statement of how they actually are, as opposed to how they think they'd like to be, or have been convinced to think that they should be. And I think that creates an existential problem for a lot of them. A lot of them are under unbearable pressure, because they can't possibly live up to what they've been given. But anyway, I wanted to kind of hit those points and fill that out a bit. Sorry for sort of cutting.
No, it's great. It's funny, because it's kind of like because in case you think I'm being rude, what I'm doing is you say something and I go, I write it down.
Sure. No, I've
just in case you thought I was on my phone.
No.
Twitter or something. But yeah, it's interesting. I remember, just if we go back to the global homogeny, and I'll edit this part out here, but see, in like 5 minutes, I'm going to nip for like the toilet for like a 5-minute break, if that's all right, just in like 5-10 minutes. But yeah, I'll edit that part out. Anyway, going back to the global homogenization thing, I clocked this. And earlier on you said when you read the Quran, you never had that like, come to Jesus, oh great, that
No.
eureka moment. I'd always known about this global homogenization, like why they're flooding people with migrants. In fact, if you look at things like dating apps like Tinder, the algorithms are set up in a particular way, which is to get white women to match with black men, and it's to create this like sort of puddle of mud of nothing.
Yep.
And I had my eureka moment. It was about 6 months ago in Scotland. I was doing whatever. I think I was out on a drive and on a walk, and I was coming home, and I stopped at a petrol station. And I used to work at that petrol station. It was owned by an old white couple, and now it was bought over by Indians, which I really don't have a problem with. I mean, you see these first generation migrants. This is the interest, and I'm going to divert quickly, and I'll come back to my point. But you're correct with the whole idea that they are just a product of their environment. If they were born in Saudi, they would be Sunni Muslims. If they were born in Antarctica, they would be flat earthers. If they were born in Africa, they would have been XYZ, XYZ, XYZ.
Sure.
And you see the first generation comes over, they work their ass off, they're great, they're dedicated. 3 generations down the line, I mean, I remember before I came to the Quran, I live in Scotland, which is basically 50% white, 50% Pakistani. Out of the 10 guys in my friend group, 7 were Muslims, and I was the only one who didn't drink or like take drugs or form like. So you
Sure.
see, like after time, those guys, they come over, they start great, and then the global homo starts to take in and all that stuff. But I remember I went into the petrol station, and it was 3 Indian guys, and I'm not trying to come across as weird or anything, but you know when you can just tell people are just ravaged by like a perversion or like a pornography addiction,
Sure.
like they have that pasty, like
Under the eyes look.
under the eyes and everything, and there was Desi music playing, and just alcohol everywhere, and I went, that's it. So when people go, oh, it's diverse, it's the total opposite. It's everyone's this one
Absolutely.
shit color, listening to
Absolutely.
shit music, which tells
Absolutely.
women to do X, Y, Z and buy booze, fuck off. Like if you take the
Absolutely.
word, and again, if you take alcohol, the word alcohol comes from al-kuhul in Arabic, which means a flesh-eating spirit. And I find it funny because I think English is pig language. I mean, if you understand, your brain can only focus its attention on one thing at a time. And I think this is a fact with language, it's through syllables. And I go, I wonder why the English language is the one homogenized world language, and it's because it's a slave language. You go, hell, oh, hell, oh. I wake up in the morning, mourning the dead,
Sure.
on certain days of the week, DAZEWEAK, to earn a living, blah, 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 blah. I had a point to make. I can't remember what it was exactly.
Well, one of the reasons, just to say, part of the reason why that's the case, and I think some of them are just, they've just happened by happenstance, is because, excuse me, so many of our words are so short. When you've got longer words, I mean, we have to have these words which sound the same but have different meanings. So that definitely happens. But excuse me, but the English language to some extent was created, and they had to create it because we had so many different dialects that couldn't talk to each other. And if you can't talk to each other, you can't create an army and go off and have big wars with other people. And so they had to create a standardized English that we could all speak. And the 2 books that really performed that function were the King James Bible and Shakespeare. And around the same time, and so that created under Bacon, under Francis Bacon, a form of English which was to become the language of, as it has come, it's become the world language. So I do take your point, but I think going back to them, I think it is the destruction of all cultures. I'm close with Said Mirza, and I've met his family, and I've been to his house and so on. And he's his father. I mean, I don't want to divulging secrets here, but his father, I think he misses very much, his homeland of Pakistan and so on. But his father's had to make some adjustments to the insanity that he's living in. And so what you end up is with, of course, they're attacking whites primarily, but they'll go for everybody, and they are destroying everybody. I remember there's this clip I came across on YouTube, and this is what I would call traditionalist Muslims, almost glorying, almost boasting, saying, talking to the whites, your daughters, your sons will be Muslim.
I've seen that. I
thought, no. Your sons will be running after white girls, sitting in the pub, listening to trash. That's what it
is.
And that's the actual design of it. So the way I see it is, and again, I'm not saying I've got nothing bad to say because I don't actually think it about what I call brand Islam necessarily. It doesn't answer my questions. It's just another religion. I'm not any more against that than I am against Jehovah's Witness, because neither of them make an awful lot of sense to me. I'm interested in the Quran itself, but I absolutely accept that there are righteous people within all of these kind of potentially within these movements. But it seems to me that what I call brand Islam was chosen by the ruling elites as a battering ram, as a point of leverage, because they know they can pick these guys up down the road. Because why do we know this? We know this because they exhibit all of the same characteristics of unthinking, unquestioning acceptance of doctrine. Well, they've already proved their qualifications on that front. I'm sure they'll continue true to type, moving down, moving along. But the way that cultures are set up is their cultures are set up in such a way that people who aren't able to think can be righteous. And that's the way I regard kind of background Islamic civilization. I've met Muslims who are cultural Muslims. They are extremely polite, generally speaking. They're very generous, generally speaking. Their culture of hospitality is really impressive, generally speaking. Now, is that because they've, understood every single, jot and tittle of the Quran? No, it's because they've grown up in that culture and they've adopted that, and it's impressive. When we had what was called then Christendom, we had similar ways of doing things. But what's happened now is that of the world culture, the idea that Islam is being brought into the West and it's going to become Islamic. No, it will stay what it is, or it will morph. But what they actually are is these Muslims. They want their mobile telephone, they want their kebabs, they want all of this stuff. What they want is they want religion as a bolt-on. They are bolt on top of this godless mammon, which is what it actually is. But you want to wear it as a sort of like a badge, like I donated to whatever charity it is. This is like a football team, like a football supporter.
You had a quote, and it was perfect. It was from dawn till dusk they'll worship Satan, and then at some point at night, like, the paraphrasing completely, but it was they'll wake up in the morning and worship Satan all day, and then at night they'll put a hat on and be part of a club and saved. That's in essence what it is. It's virtue signaling.
Of course, I'm not saying it's true in all cases. I'm sure I absolutely accept there are pious men. God knows the truth of it, and we'll see it on the day of judgment. But what you do find is that it's a time tax. That whereas Islam was a civilization. It doesn't just import into the West, and because for Christians they've lost their religion. For them, actual Christendom was a civilization under the Catholic Church. But once that started to sort of lose its way, the kind of the follow-on, the inheritor of Christendom isn't Protestantism, it's NATO. That's the and even that's beginning to collapse. So anyway, what I see is that people pay a time tax. They think, well, I give God, 5 minutes here and 5 minutes there, but the rest of the time, I'm working for a bank and I'm doing this. No, it's very difficult. It's very difficult. But God knows the truth of it. I'm not here to criticize anyone in particular. I'm just saying that it seems to me that the ruling elites, despite the fact they are degrading, they're not stupid. They're very clever, and they use Islamic cultures to destroy both them and us, and they know what they're doing. They do know what they're doing. So and just a point I want to hit, I'm sure we're both aware of how people were manipulated under the Snowvid, as you call it, thing, and now with what's going on in Ukraine and various other places. And people are saying yes, this was manipulation. 3 years later. But they've been manipulated for the last hundreds of years. What happened to that? What do you think feminism was? It was the same people basically spinning up their minds. They didn't just sort of pop out of a bottle in 2018 or wherever it was. No, they'd been through the event in New York with the 2 towers and the 3 planes, and actually 2 planes and 3 towers.
Yes,
but it's a
Sam, you
process.
sounded so full. You sounded so full of hate there. You said 3 I'm going to sling some words at you now. You sounded full of hate, and you're an anti-Sem for not identifying that it was 2 planes and 3 towers. You nearly said 2 and 2. You anti-Semite.
I nearly did. It's a slip of some kind. I mean, clearly. I mean, for me, I was awake. I mean, we're jumping around. I'm sorry about this, but I was awake
Don't worry
before that. So, for me, when I saw that, it took me literally 5 minutes. I thought, because when it first happened, I thought if this happened to America every day for the next 10 years, it wouldn't pay them back for what they've done in Iraq and other places. Quite frankly, that was my response. You know, but it took me 5 minutes. I thought, nah, this isn't, you know, I'd already worked out, you know, I could see what they were going to do, how they were going to use this. So, but again, I think the point I was trying to make was that each thing breaks you. Each lie you accept makes it harder the next time. So when it came to things like what you call Snowvid and other things, people, they'd already accepted the events in New York. They'd already accepted the lie about men and women. They'd already accepted the idea that sodomy is a lifestyle choice. Sodomy is a sin. It's a sin. And I have actually quite a lot of compassion and understanding for people who commit sins, because I've committed quite a lot myself. So I do know, you know, what sin looks like. But when we say that it isn't a sin, we deprive the person who is afflicted by something which is wrong of the opportunity of getting right. And that's really my main argument with it. It's not a Coke or Pepsi choice. And it doesn't, again, put you into this camp where you are a hater or an evil person. Let's take, I think a good analogy is drug addiction. So somebody comes to me and say, you know what, I'm addicted to, you know, heroin. And I say, would you like some help? You know, let's see if we can help you get off this stuff. Although I would argue that heroin is overrated as a drug. I'm not that I've ever taken it, but you try giving up sugar or coffee.
Oh, yeah.
So, but anyway, we treat the person who is a drug addict as somebody with a problem. And we should not demonize those people and treat them as if, you know, they're necessarily evil. But we don't want them giving packets of smack to our children. I think we can agree on that. Well, that's kind of how I feel about this other thing. But what they do is they frame the conversation in such a way that if you don't want them giving packets of smack to your children, you know, in terms of my analogy, then you're just an evil person. Well, maybe I am, but not for this reason. And that's really my argument with it. And this is what I've noticed. This is a constant. You can take this to the bank. No, everything to do with this neo-Marxist agenda is always, always, always presented and will only be discussed in terms of what's wrong with you. And that is called gaslighting. And that is psychopathy. It's a psychopathy.
That's exactly it. Exactly it.
But it's I wanted to go back because I started on this pantextual analysis about these what I call stop words, and I just for people who were interested in that, I wanted just to finish that point because the rest of my work, I'm not here to sell books. All of my work can be downloaded for free. If people want to buy books, that's fine. If they want to help my work, that's great. But that isn't why I'm doing this. But they can take it for free as well, and that's fine. So that if they want to dig into it, they can. But if they understand just this one core concept, it will make the rest of my work, I think, a bit more accessible. And I think it was when I was going back to when I was reading the Quran as in translation, and these certain concepts began to kind of get, you see, it doesn't quite fit. And to finish up the point of Bedr Khrozni with his, I should think, extremely tedious, but also brilliant work on the Hittite libraries, I realized that my situation was vastly easier than that of Bedr Khrozni because we know what most of the words in this book means, what they mean, and also we have the interlocking system of roots and so on. But if I to use my analogy of HSP as it were as being a root, just because Arabic uses roots, and you find that you've got hospice and hospital and so on, hospitable, and then hospitate is said to mean give us your money or pay the priesthood. You know that you've got a kind of moment, and I had these kind of moments. And I noticed that in most cases, they were connected with the religion that is claimed for this book. And so what I did was I put the entire Quran into an Excel spreadsheet along with all of the roots. And I developed a system of looking at of approaching the text, not word by word by word, but by multiple. And I've made passes through the text. I don't know. Many tens of thousands of times, okay, across the whole text. So looking at every single word in a particular root, for example, and this system of roots is central to the Arabic. So what I found, to take the word salat, which is, and the reason why I'm mentioning this is because if you say I'm going to read this book and apply my brain, the typical kind of response from a traditionalist Muslim, and I'm not criticizing traditionalist Muslims any more than I would do other people. It's just they tend to be the people who engage with me because they claim monopoly rights over this book, you see, and they'll say, well, then how do you pray? And that's their answer. Well, who says that this, again, this is assuming conclusions. Who says that this word means prayer? You say this based on what? Based on another literature. But this book claims to be from God and complete. Oh, yeah. But actually, we're not going to follow that. Well, I'd seen all this before. I'd seen it in Christianity. If you read, the New Testament, you start off with Jesus and you end up with Paul. Well, there you are, bait and switch. The Quran itself says that every prophet, the shaitan sends these people, deluding people with these decorations of speech. Every prophet. Was Muhammad a prophet? Yes, he was. Well, is this likely to happen to him? Well, yes, it is. So what I did was I went through this and I found that this word salat is used by the traditionalist to mean actually 3 or 4 different things depending on what he needs at the time. And what I did was do what Bedr Khosni's done. And I think it's 93 different instances of this root in the Quran, and was to look for values which can be consistent. And again, I didn't write the Quran, but it does claim to be consistent. But their interpretation of it is not consistent. It's not consistent because they need salat to mean, well, prayer. But what do you mean by prayer? Well, I mean, what the traditionalist means by prayer is very vague. Yes, what a prayer. Well, are we talking about making some sort of mental application to God? Because that's a form of prayer. What they actually mean, when you get right down to it, is what they mean is something much closer to, for example, what we mean when we say the foxtrot, a very particular kind of routine, a physical routine at particular times. That's what they mean by prayer. They mean a very particular liturgical, physical, spiritual, let's assume also practice. That's what they mean. That's not what I mean by prayer. That's something else. That's a ritual. That's what they're claiming. So let's call it the ritual prayer. Okay, they call it the ritual prayer. That's fine as well. In fact, I have nothing against it, like per se. I'm just saying that this does not fit in every single instance of the word salat in the Quran. It just doesn't. And I'm not guessing because I have their translations, and their translations are they basically, if you've ever seen anybody on London Bridge, a man on London Bridge with an open suitcase and playing Find the Lady and moving bait and switch, that's what's going on. This is dishonest. This is they're making claims for this book. The Quran is this, the Quran is that. Really? Okay, well, let's check it then. And having checked it, what I find is that the Quran is those things, but not on the basis of what they claim. And again, as we've seen, as we talked about with libtards and the West, and I'd seen this all before, assumed conclusions, circular reasoning, and when that doesn't work, name calling and attacking and throwing stones and shunning and all the rest of the same kind of cultic behavior that you find. And so that was my system. And so once I discovered that this was the case, I went through all the words that were causing problems. And it's not just that I've done this and I've said, here are this is what the Quran means. I've all the notes are there. My work, the Quran, a complete revelation, is the application of this. Is it the most beautiful English? No, it's not. It's not meant to be. It's meant to be consistent. And I document meticulously to the point of ad nauseum what exactly it is that I've done. And I think if I have a talent apart from persistence, it's really the ability to spot patterns. I'm really, that's something I'm good at, is pattern recognition. I recognize that there are patterns in things in the Quran, and I just spent the time. I estimate that I spent around 20,000 hours doing this work, essentially. And, you know, these are 20,000 Gerrans hours, and I'm just completely fixed on this. I mean, my back is shot. I've stood at this computer for 20,000 hours. I'm now having, you know, have sort of, you know, restorative therapy to kind of get the use of my arms and all kinds of things back. I'm just fascinated, and I looked into it, and that work. I mean, I'm not complaining about that. You know, you pay a price for whatever you do. I chose to use my time in this way, and I'm very grateful that I had the opportunity, and I consider myself very blessed to have found answers to the things that I was interested in. But that is one thing that I found. Another thing that I found is what I call Quranic definitions. So what you find in the Quran, in my working life, I have a working life, and I have dealt with contracts. And what you find in contracts is that they often define their terms at the beginning. And what you find if you read Al-Baqarah with, you know, not assuming this religion, because I came to it as though I'd found it in a box in a cave. What would I make of this text? And what I find is it'll say, and such and such and such and such and such and such, and these are the losers. Okay, we have a definition for losers. And so and so and so and so and so, and these are al-kafirun. Okay, well, now we have a definition for al-kafirun. And I went through and the Quran, looking at every instance of these things when I now had a working definition, and you find that it fits. Because I'll give you an example. Al-kafirun, those, which I say is, you know, those, you know, these are people actually who claim righteousness but don't really follow it. It's much closer to the concept of hypocrite. This isn't a denier of, you know, reality. Alladhina kafirun, yes, you know, those are people who have denied. But al-kafirun as a type, it says that shaitan is min al-kafirin. He's of the kafirun. Well, he's talking to God Almighty. He's not a denier of reality.
Exactly.
In fact, he's a servant of God. He's allowed to operate within these, if you want to call it hudud Allah. So he's allowed to operate within these boundaries. And so this definition of, because what the religion will say is, well, a kafirun is somebody who denies al-Islam, and al-Islam is what we've said it is. Well, again, this is assumed conclusions. This, all the rest of it is gaslighting. I use the Quran as a dictionary of its own terms. And so that gives a small insight into what was a massive hermeneutical undertaking. And all of my proof is get it for free. I'm not on a book selling thing here. I'm on a mission. This is my, you know, this is my mission. This is my calling. I'm just fulfilling that. That's it. That's all it is, really. But people can get to it through Quranite.com. But we have Brother Saeed Mirza has put together an online version of it, which is searchable, and you can very, very usefully looking at roots. If you're studying Arabic, it will really save you a load of time, even if you don't agree with my conclusions. But all of the notes, all of the thinking are there, and it's all hyperlinked. You can get around it really quickly. You don't, you know, you can use it on your phone. Everybody's got a phone now. You can take it anywhere. It doesn't weigh anything. All of those sorts of things. If you want a book, you can have a book. But that's you know, that's there. And so that mechanism, what I did was I treated it as a technical problem that could be solved. But also I found, as I read this, that there was, leaving aside all the kind of the technical minutiae of this approach. And again, I want to say, I thought somebody would have done this. It wasn't that I kind of, as I said, the Great White Hope came in to explain to the Muslims. No, I just thought, who's done this work? You know, and it turned out nobody actually. Okay, then I'm going to have to. It sounds ridiculous, but I'm going to have to do it. And I totally admit that I was unqualified to do this. I became qualified by doing it. But what I also noticed through reading this book is there's a totally different narrative to what one finds in the Hadith. And I'll give you an example. They say to the Prophet, they ask him, you know, when is the end? When is it coming? And he says, it has nothing to do with you. What has that got to do with you? You don't know. So you have a completely different narrative. On the one hand, you have the Muhammad of the Hadith, who is kind of like Yoda. He's a kind of 7th century Yoda. There's nothing this guy doesn't know. You know, whether you should cross the bathroom using your right foot, your left foot, eat dates with your left hand, your right hand. You know, you can see, you know, whether black oil is good for you. You can black seed oil. You can see that this was a real battleground for the market traders and
I didn't ever think of that. I never thought about that. That makes so much sense now.
The
That makes
rulers
so much sense.
they just, you know, if you want something, you just make up a hadith. So you can see what it is. This is a totally different narrative. I'm not saying it doesn't have value. I'm just saying it's got nothing. If the Quran is what it says it is, then it has no place. And if the Quran isn't what it says it is, you don't. What's the Quran for? You can't have both. And I'd seen it before, going back to Christianity. I'd seen it before. They want Jesus to be a prophet and the Son of God and this, but what you actually get down to is it can't be both. One or the other, but not both. It doesn't work. And this doesn't work either. And that's
that's interesting, because that was what originally happened with me. And I think the narrative I told earlier, narratives, like you pointed this out, it's a very interesting topic of words, because that's what hadith translates to in Arabic. And the Quran actually says, I think, is it not like nine times or something, I think it was, where it goes pretty much verbatim, after this, which hadith will you follow? And then people go, oh yes, I'll just. But the interesting one with me is, I'm glad you brought up that one, because there was three things that kind of, I cocked my head and went, okay, now I've seen that, I can't just not see it anymore. So when people get angry and they associate you're rejecting Muhammad as a prophet, you're not. That's a false association. It's like, one quick thing I'll say is, if you're like a young guy and this is all kind of frying your head, a good start to make is look into logic fallacies. Now, whenever you figure something out and you bring this evidence to people, you're going to get hit with ad hominem, which is attack your character, not the argument. Appeal to authority, seek a scholar, NASA. Appeal to consensus, everybody knows. Circular reasoning, no true scholar, all this sorts of stuff. But the three that got me were that one. It was that, in essence, in the Quran, he goes, well, asks about what should we tell them at the ends of times, and God pretty much says, only I will know, only I know. And then in hadith, there's Imam Mahdi, and then Isa's going to return. And then I thought, well, then by that logic, if this is all fact that we're going to have to entrust our internal souls with, why is it not just in the Quran? Like, why is it not in there? Well, because then that it can't be complete if you're also pulling extraneous. It can't, like, it's double think, and that's what makes a slave. It's the moon landing, but if you say 5,999,999 died in Germany, you go to prison. Now you're just a slave. It's like that double think logic fail. Another one was the fact that, and you pointed this out, that even the salat ritual, you can't find it laid out once in any hadith, any sahih, any sahih. Like, and I said this to my wife, and I go, it's not that I want all these problems in my life. Like, I don't go looking out and I go, okay, so gravity pins water to the surface of a ball, but yet 1.1 trillion tons of water precipitates up into the clouds like an angel, but it doesn't get. And you can watch a leaf, watch a little raindrop float from a leaf and just go poop, but it's pinning all the water to the ball. And it can't be like, I don't want these problems.
No, I mean,
I said, I explained to her, I said, if you had the task of following around, as they say, Rasulullah, the seal of the prophets with the complete message from God, which will dictate your eternal soul, and your entire job was to write down what he was doing, and the one, and again, I'm going to go from tired. It reminds me very much of like what you were saying with the Jesus and the synoptic gospels, Matthew, Mark, and Luke. For God to, if you claim Jesus as God, and I'm glad you pointed out, you can't really even make the claim. He made the claim that he was a son of God. He's a prophet. He doesn't really even say that, right? But to follow that narrative, what you're basically saying is that God omitted, or for like he was drunk or something, and he was like, okay, we gave him the Bible, next book, Jibril, come here. And then he's writing, and he's got vodka in one hand, and he's just go, give him it. And then they're like, oh, you forgot Salah, the number one most, like, that's kind of the impression you're giving God, that he keeps omitting and forgetting all these important things, and he needs you to come and fix his problems while you're also spouting virtue that you're following him. It makes it makes no sense at all. And then you read not the last one for me. Like I was saying, you have this one job to follow the prophet around every day. And if he was a prophet allegedly for 23 years, I think it was, or something, according to that narrative. So if he's praying 5 times a day, the same thing every day for 23 years, I don't exactly know how many times he's doing it, but it must be in the tens of thousands, close to hundreds of thousands. And you couldn't write it down fully once, and that was your whole job.
That's
Why?
right.
How am I then meant to go, that makes sense, trust my eternal soul?
And,
like, it doesn't
also,
make...
It doesn't make any sense, and it is a pseudoscience. There's no question about it. It's a made-up science, and the thing of it is that you could take an 8-year-old boy from any traditional Muslim family, and they'll be able to, if you say to them, how does it work? How do you pray? Well, you've got you've got the Fajr, you've got this, and it's 2 rak'ah. Well, actually, you've got 2 and then 2 if you wish to, and then you've got the midday prayer, and then you've got Asr prayer, and then so Aisha prayer. Okay, fine. You've got all these different prayers. Okay, so let's say a not particularly bright 8-year-old without a phenomenal memory who is righteous. He can do that. He's managed to do this. But this whole science is predicated on the idea that these very righteous people, and I'm not saying they weren't righteous if they actually existed, so how much to extent any of it.
I don't think they did.
I don't know. So I'm going to say I don't know on that one. But let's say okay. The idea is that you're able to retrospectively work out how amazing their memories were and all the rest of it. But even given that these most righteous people have ever existed outside of the Prophet, and they had the most amazing memories, they weren't able to memorize this thing that you can get in 5 minutes. And so again, this is part of it, and why it's a little bit, to my mind, somewhat ridiculous. Now, I'm not saying that that any righteous action, any action of sincere taqwa before God, of bowing down before God, whatever it is, fine. But to say that this is normative in the Quran, this is the Quran is saying that is what you must do. This book, which is complete, doesn't tell you how to do the thing that it tells you what to do often, and that cannot be so in a book which says it's from God, is going to be protected by God, and is consistent with itself. And the tension comes because they'll come to say, well, then how do you pray? Well, why do you assume that means prayer? You're coming to this book attaching this thing to it. I'm not modernizing. I'm not here to modernize Islam. I mean, I'm sure some people think that I am, but actually I'm not. In fact, I would say that what I'm calling people to is harder than following a sort of off the rack religion, because you really have to fight. You have to stand up. You will lose friends, family, you name it.
Tell me about it.
You'll basically be on a hijrah in this world, where you have to forsake pretty much everything, family, friends, all kinds of things. The price is high. The price is much, much higher than you're going to pay than being, just a sort of, a me too in a religion that you never really question, never really think about. But my question would be, what do you want? See, I pay a price for what I do, but I have, you pays your money, takes your choice. I want the garden. I have had enough hell. Hell I've seen. I've had it up to here with it. I'm not interested in it. I want the garden. I want rewards. And you find that there's plenty of room. People don't want it. What they want is an easy life, to feel that they belong and to not question things. Well, that's fine, but you're going to have a hard time with the Quran, because the Quran, if you look at Ibrahim, that he's questioned, and he fought the idolatry of that time. We living in a time of idolatry too. I think the other argument that people say is, well, who are you? Who are you to be an authority on this subject? And I say, you know what? You're right. Who am I? I'm somebody who's done my own due diligence. That's what I've done. And what I'm suggesting is, if you don't like what I found, do your due diligence and come back with something that beats what I've done, because I've presented a solution to things that you've never been able to do, a cogent solution to al-huruf al-muqatta'at, which are the disjointed or mysterious letters. Again, people can download that, but all I did with that was apply the same methodology actually. And then with the God protocol, which is the work that I've done, bring me something better and I'll accept it.
The
But
God protocol, I have that. Again, I have no I don't have an affiliate link and exterior alternative motives
nor
here.
do I.
I've got, and by the way, I would say, because I understand people when they work hard, and I've noticed this. If Sam worked in McDonald's and served people cancer food, nobody would have a problem with him taking home £15 an hour. And if he spent that money on booze and hookers, you wouldn't show up at his door and complain. But when a man says no to that and dedicates his life to serving his fellow man and giving them fantastic work which will benefit them at his own expense, people then have a problem with them, putting food on the table and taking income in. So yeah.
Can I just say on that, people will always criticize. You're never going to be able to please everybody. All I do is I have had people come to say, oh, well, the Prophet gave everything for free. I give everything for free.
Mm-hmm.
I do allow people who wish to support my work, but I don't sell what I've got. But you'll never please everybody. You're supposed to somehow be, I gave up my career to do this, and that's fine. And I was actually quite happy to go away after I'd finished these projects, because there's a time, any project has got a lifespan. And a couple of people have come forward and said, no, we'd like to help you get another project in. I was, okay, I'm actually good at this, and I'm better than this than I would be at, starting a business or something. But if I have to start as a business to support my family, okay, I'll do that. It's okay. But people will always criticize you. Doesn't matter, what you do. And honestly, I don't know what's out there because I don't look at it. I've got enough going. I have enough crazy coming into my inbox. I don't have to go looking for it. But I'm sure it exists. Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off, but
no, you're fine. You're totally fine. I was just going to say, so I'm not telling people to do this, and even if I was, don't get annoyed. But I have all three of Sam's books. I have I've got it here. I think I showed it at the start. This is the full translation, and it's phenomenal. Like, again, I understand you can blow smoke up people's back end when you're interacting with them, and you can say things are good when they're not for social reasons and etc. But that's by far the greatest translation I've read, and I've read 4, The Glorious, and a couple I can't remember. Anyone with an Arabic name, it doesn't stick with me at all because I'm not an Arabic speaker. The God Protocol, I got about 10 pages in, and it's the reason being is, say you read something like How to Win Friends and Influence People, you're like,
I have read that actually.
Yeah, it's decent. But with the God Protocol, you have this complete mental shift, like we were talking about earlier with the notice of liability. And you take all the prophets and you analyze what they were doing. That book is so phenomenal that it's one of those ones. It's like reading who's the guy I'm thinking of? The guy that wrote Heaven and Hell, the Christian mystic. People don't know who I'm talking about. It's like reading his stuff. You can go half a page before you're like, sitting and thinking about things for 10 minutes. So it's phenomenal. And I would say get the physical books, and the reason being, take my word for it if you want, I really don't. I think the data collection is done. I think as they start to move into a central bank online currency, the internet is going to either go away or it's going to become centralized, and these free little things you have are going to disappear. So I'm now collecting things in physical copy. But can I say a couple of things about what you were saying? Because it just sets me off. And
please do. I just want to say though, if people can't afford to buy books, that's fine, and you can download the PDF for free and just print it off at home for a copy. So it's not about selling books. Take it for free. You can get it for free on quadranight.com.
But yeah, one of those things that you said, people come to you and they go, well, who do you think you are? And this is one of the logic fallacies again. It's called appeal to authority. Sure. And when you read the Quran, the Quranic narrative compared to the Hadith is again, this isn't my opinion, and I don't want trouble, but I have eyes, ears, and an index finger, and I can figure things out. I've got that from you because I've listened to you so many times. Sure. But the Quran, when you read it, it's saying, "Has thou considered? Have you pondered?" It's giving you the authority to make the decision. It's not going, well, if you wipe your ass here and eat and ride a camel, you go to the good place and blah, blah, blah. It's calling you to reason and calling you to take the authority of your own life. And when people do that, they go, who do you think you are? And you'll have realized this. You feel, especially today, because the world seems to be running on gaslighting, you feel so much projection from people. Like I'll go in my comment section, I'll make a video and I'll say, well, I can't even say that. I'll make a very reasonable video and I'll say something like, fornication is bad for people. And you'll see in the comments a guy called Paul, the Australian vlogger, and he's bald. And he'll say, you hate your name, Paul, and you hate the fact that your feet burn in Australia, and you hate the fact that you're bald. And I go, oh, really, bald, Paul, in Australia? Is that you feel so much projection from people? They're never angry at you, they're angry at themselves, and your existence kind of touches the wound on their skin. Like it's not really about you, it's about them. So when people go, who do you think you are? That's them coming from the internal projection of, I'm trying to bear my authority over you and control you. Do you know what I mean? We're like, you see it with the Talmud, Paul, Hadith. It's taking it off the individual man and a sort of priest class projecting out and controlling it's claiming a monopoly on intellect and information. So my typical response to that is, I am called to reason. I'm called to be the own authority, and I am responsibility and authority are linked completely. You can't have one without the other.
Yes.
So yes, if I take a bunch of responsibility, I am going to be the authority for my own existence. That therefore does not mean that I'm trying to project that out onto other people like you are with your deception. So it's very interesting. One thing, I don't know if you've ever looked into this, but with you were saying, did these guys ever exist? These sort of, there's the romanticization of the three generations and all that.
Sure.
It's very difficult for me personally, and I know you'll do your own research, or you probably already have. Like you said, you've dedicated upwards of 20,000 hours. I could barely wake up at 10 a.m. some days. But if you look at Imam Bukhari, the claim is that, and this reminds me a lot of Christians, where the number one commandment in Christianity is ascribe no powers to God. There is only one God. And then they go, yes, but you see, on the winter solstice, there's this omnipotent, all-knowing, outside of space and time man called Santa Claus, who grants you goodness or punishment based on how you behave. And I go, oh, so just like a micro version of God. Like they always fail. And it's the same with shirk in Islam. So when you look at the Imam Bukhari story, and I've done my research into this, and as a man I'm 22, but I'm 22 going on like 6 million at this point, right? It's been an interesting ride, right? But I can spot shit very easily. Like you were saying, the pattern recognition, it's the same sort of patterns. It's like the appeal to authority. It's the same stuff over and over and over and over again. And then gaslighting when you ask a reasonable question. The claim was that Imam Bukhari memorized this. I'm not exaggerating because I remembered the number, and this isn't me. You can go verify this for yourself, and I've not got a measurement wrong here or anything wrong. It was that he memorized 600,000 pages. 600,000. So if you take this Quran that Sam wrote, again, this thing could be. You should have a license to buy this thing, because we said you just throw it over someone's head, they're in a hospital, right? This is, I don't know how many pages it is, but maybe 2,000 or something?
No, it's just under 1,200.
Under 1,200, right? And the claim is that he memorized 600,000, and 600,000 to me sounds very like gematria to begin with because of the six thing. But that's the claim. He memorized 600,000 pages of hadith, and then in his own mind, he never wrote them down. In his own mind, he wrote down, I think it was to the last, I can't remember how many it was, like 8,000 that he believed were valid. And I go, well, what you've done there, if that is true, and I'm far too not dumb to realize that's most likely complete horseshit, is you've made this kind of deity out of an imam. Well, and you read the Quran and it tells you, it goes, oh, they have taken their scholars as prophets. But when you do it, you're taking Imam Bukhari and you're making him kind of like a deity, almost like a god, or how they claim, like they claim that if you read Hadith, Muhammad's infallible, but in the Quran he says he knows nothing outside the human compulsion. Once I see that, I then can no longer just pretend I have it. Like, do you want me to lie? So what you're saying with that Imam Bukhari is the reason that you have this salat ritual prayer, which he never even managed to get full once, even though they all would have seen it like 10,000 times, which again, like you said, an 8-year-old could do it. You're then saying that if hadith, if these small things, because really what hadith does, in my view, okay, and don't get triggered, people watching, is the Quran has a set narrative of, again, works and faith, and it has a set reward structure, and you're rewarded on actual work, like actual sacrifice. Like you can't bullshit your way through it. Whereas hadith, it's massive reward for very virtue signally easy things to do. So like an example is, if you do your salah, you get rewards. But then if you do salah with a miswak, you get 10 times, 70 times the reward, I think it is. And I go, it's very obvious to me what's going on here. It's kind of like to get your teeth into people, and you go, it's exactly what you said with the Persians. If you wanted to conquer someone, the number one thing you do is either control opposition, lead them astray, like co-opt and control. It's to say, you see it all the time now in modern media where the ruling powers will realize, okay, there's a bunch of men now that no longer want high-speed internet pornography and no longer want women who have slept with 700 guys by the time they're 19 years old. Sure. Let's give them Andrew Tate, and he'll tell them that if you put them on OnlyFans, and like it's the same thing over and over again. So what you're doing then is if without Imam Bukhari, you wouldn't have salah, which is, according to Sunni Islam, the number one foundation of being a Sunni Muslim, like the number one. And again, I'm not trying to antagonize people. I don't have a problem with it. My wife does it all the time. And we had this conversation. She's like, you know what works for me? And I go, fine. I don't give a shit. Fine, great.
Sure.
But what you're saying is, without Imam Bukhari, in essence, if he woke up one morning and someone, like, I don't know, who was the guy that Apple hit him on the head and he thought of gravity, allegedly. Again, definitely didn't happen. But imagine that happened, and he's, what was that song? Because he already can't remember 90% of it. Like, okay. If he'd forgot that or died, what you're in essence saying is, without Imam Bukhari, every single person on the planet would have been cast into the fire, because they would never have been able to do the number one fundamental thing. Because that's what, according to the scholars and sheikhs, if you don't do the salah, you are a kafir. So what you're saying is, without one man, the entire world would have been cast into the fire on the Day of Judgment. You're making an idol out of
not the entire
man.
world, because there are righteous Christians, there are righteous Jews, and etc. But that's what they say. Without this, it depends what strain of Islam you belong to.
That's what I meant. According to that narrative, that's not what I believe, but according to that.
Without these other people, that somehow the Quran, what they're actually saying is the Quran is insufficient. I mean, I'll just speak to my own experience. As I think sometimes people think that, a lot of second generation immigrant Muslims in the UK, for example, which is where I'm from, they think, somebody like me, it's a way they can hold on to their religion, their faith, without following what quite clearly they've got questions about, at least. And I think they tend to feel that I'm setting myself up as a sort of replacement. I mean, I've had lots of questions. I'll give you an example. Can you get married over Skype? That's according to the Quran. I kid you not. Is it possible for me to be ritually clean if I wash my hands when I've got nail polish on? Do I have to take the nail polish off? I just say, read the book, think for yourself, stop being an idiot. Pretty much, because what else can I say? People want to be micromanaged. You see, the tyrannies work because there's a market for it, a massive market for it. That's the only reason they can work. Matthew, I mean, I hope this doesn't come across as as condescending in any way, but you're a very bright guy, well ahead of the curve. You're going to be pretty lonely in life, because you're not going to find a lot of people who are going to understand, what it is. But that's the price.
And quickly, can I just again? Sure. I don't mean to interject all the time, but Sam said this at the start earlier, where he goes, "I'm not a dumb guy," and trust me, you get a degree of survivor's guilt. If you're a psychopath in this world, it's kind of like it's like heaven. But if you're an empathetic person, it's in essence hell. And I use the analogy that I'm trying to explain to people. It's like, imagine you were in a pit, you're in a well, and everyone's in a well, right? And everyone's going, "Oh, did you see NASA CGI? Yeah, we come from nothing. Richard Dawkins really knows what he's talking about." And you're sitting around, and they go, "Hey, would you, if I give you a piece of paper which isn't real, if I give you 10, you can have it, but give me 4 back or I'll put you in a cage. And I'm like, okay, this is insane. There's a ladder, and I climb up the ladder, and I get out the well, and I go, you can all leave. There's a ladder. You can just leave. You can come out the well. And they go, really? Yeah, well, I'm glad flat earthers exist, so I know that I'm not that stupid. If you sit there and you're like, why won't you just stop? Like you look around you, like, it's not that we particularly think we're that bright. It's just that everyone's so retarded. But if you're one of the people ruling the world, I seen Jacob Rothschild just died the other day. For these guys, like that psychopathy mindset, it's like heaven to them, because they can go, right, well, I've got, like how Ben Shapiro thinks. They go, well, I've got 333 civilians in a pit. I can give them all that. I can fluoridate them and tell them it's good for them. But for us, we're like, just get out. And it's quite painful to watch.
Of course it's painful. Of course it's painful. Do you know Plato's Cave? Have you come across
that's exactly it. That's exactly it.
It's Plato's Cave. We have an expression in Russian, Goria tuma. It means basically, intelligence is painful or something, or kind of sad. It's not really an intelligence thing. I think it's something else. I mean, I've met very, very, very bright people who are complete materialists or whatever it is. I don't think it's intelligence. Intelligence helps, but I don't think it's the only thing. I don't think it's maybe even the most important thing. It's something else. It's going back to what I mentioned at the outset. I'm a believer because I'm created this way. And what this world really does is, and I've fallen foul of this in my life, is it wants you to compromise. And I just reached a point about 10 or 15 years ago where I just said, no. And I have to say this because it's true. It's not me sort of throwing a morsel, a scrap to the feminists. I'm saying it because it is true. I can only do what I do because my wife supports me in it. She's 100% behind it, and that's absolutely the fact. There was a kind of a historical moment in every family has a sort of a narrative, story they tell themselves that becomes, their own story. In our life, after we just got married, we moved to Spain and lived on the beach. I had this idea of sort of running a sort of my business on the beach and all the rest of it. And we got there and we're living on the beach. And after 2 weeks, I couldn't believe it. I was bored. I couldn't stand it. I was going so crazy. And I learned a great lesson, because I had this vision of me and my wife and our little girl living on the beach in Spain and making that happen. And I got to this point after this, I thought, this is a very interesting principle, because I was completely laser focused, because I had an absolutely clear goal and I knew why I wanted to do it, even though after 2 weeks I was really bored. I knew, and I thought, this principle is amazing. How could I apply this to something that matters? If I could do anything, what would I do? And I thought, I'd overthrow the elite. I don't mean, I would hold them to account, because I can see where it's going. It's going to total tyranny. I would stop this. And I thought to myself, how do I do that? Well, you look at what worked in the past. What worked in the past was the Quran. The Quran holds that. And there was a point at where I went to my wife, and she could see that I was going through sort of Sam Gerrans' existential angst sort of moment. And she asked me what was wrong. And I just said, you know what, I don't want to spend my life working in what I'm doing. I want to do this. This is my mission. But there is going to be no money in it. We're going to be bankrupt. And we're also going to throw, it means throwing a hand grenade into the hornet's nest of the Islamic world. It's not what I want to do, but unfortunately, that is what's going to happen. I'm going to lose my family. I'm going to lose this. We're going to pretty much be shunned. Are you with me? This is my beautiful young wife who married a guy who, had a business, and I'm saying, no, we're going to chuckle. Well, I wasn't saying.
It's funny. It's literally, I can't explain how much this is resident with me right now. Like, for example, I own and started, so long story short, I made a YouTube video and I said usury is bad, and I got striked, and I went, you know what, fuck off, this is gay and dumb, and I went and I made my own social media. So I own, so if you want to talk about career suicide, right? I own the only Muslim social media platform on the face of the earth. And again, I'm doing this video with you. So there is this kind of, like, I agree with you. You just you get to a point where you're like, it's never going to work. And as well, I would like to test for myself. I've tried to not to be this way. Like, sure, I've sat there with my wife and I went, you know what, I don't know, do you ever get these moments where you sit there and you go, You know, when you read the Quran and it says the shaitan's claim basically is, I'm made of fire, they're made of clay. And there's
Yep.
been some times I've sat there at night just dealing with absolute idiocy from people I'm trying to help, and I go, is he correct? Like, are these people that are running scripts and psyops and wars, are they just evil, or do they have a valid reason for hating you? Like, is there a case to them? And I've sat there for day like very recently, and I've thought, fuck it, I'm gonna try, and I'm gonna chill, and I'm gonna do what they do. I'm gonna get paid. I'm gonna take care of me. Within a day, the next day, I'm like back to I can't get out of it. Like, I remember you said you've tried to go to sleep a few times. You just can't do it. It's difficult. But I get those moments now where I sit and I go, like, does the shaitan have a claim? And the best way I've had it ever explained to me, this realm, because you can get very theological, and I notice this with Christians and Muslims. It's kind of like trad apologetics, where no one's interested in what's right, they're interested in who's right. And it's about, oh, I schooled this guy, or David Wood takes out this guy, and it's very tedious and boring. But if you want like a fundamental way to look at the realm, this was explained to me by a guy called Christopher Gardner, one of the smartest guys I know. And he said this world is, it was Cal Washington that he got it from. And he explained this world's like a court. So in the heavens, you had Shaitan made a claim. And this goes right back to the notice of liability thing. It is like, this world is a court in essence. So the Shaitan makes a claim, I'm made of fire, they're made of clay. He claimed, and he asked for authority, and then respite after it. He goes, I will lead them astray. They will follow me and not you. So God sets out the firmament, right? And it's like a courtyard. So God is the judge, Shaitan, the Satan, is the accuser, and man is on trial. And you have your prophets, like all of them. Like,
I just want to quickly jump in. Accept your sincere servants among them. Accept the sincere servants among them, and he makes that's very clear that there are, God has sincere servants. I think. Anyway, please carry on. I just wanted to say that because it's important.
No, that was a good point. I never considered that, actually, but that was kind of my theology with it. And then you have your witnesses. Your witness attorneys are like your Isa, Muhammad, all of them throughout, and that's kind of the way that I look at the world. And I sit there and I go, like, I've never met anybody who's genuinely evil. And it's like what you were saying earlier regarding the sodomy thing. The idea that you're born a sodomite, even which, if you're religious, makes absolutely no sense. And if you're a Richard Dawkins kind of guy who thinks that a single cell, multi-cell, and you could divide without procreation, but then you needed procreation despite the fact that the genes pass on based on how easy it is, and then a man and a woman, one woman had half an ovary for 1,000,000 years somewhere in Africa. So, like, if you believe in that, you also can't believe that the sodomite thing is genetic. It's a grooming thing. And you look at what's going on in schools now, or the sodomite agenda. Are these people genuinely, openly evil, or is it a response to trauma? You know what I mean? And I get these moments where I'm just like, it's a vague line to me, you know?
All right, a couple of things. Number one, most people are reasonably good in their own eyes. But, you know, the people who were manning the killing fields in Cambodia were virtue signaling, just like the people who are doing these things to children in the West now. So that's the first thing. The second thing is, I'm not interested in numbers. I've never been interested in numbers. My YouTube channel has a grand total of 11,000 subscribers, and I get about 1,500 views. I couldn't care less. My book, The Quran, A Complete Revelation, is dedicated to the few, because I'm only interested in the few. I take a medieval perspective, and you know, the Quran says this: if you follow the mass of men, you will go astray. Jesus said, you know, wide is the gate, you know, and broad is the way that leads to destruction, and many will enter therein. This is a minority thing. This is the way. This is the tradition. This is the great tradition. Unfortunately, this is just the way it is. It's not, doesn't fit very well with how we are today, because now we're trained to think that numbers matter. I would like to recommend a couple of books, if anybody's interested, and not mine. I would highly recommend that people read somebody called René Guénon, Guenon. His book, Signs of the Times, and the Reign of Quantity and Signs of the Times. The second book by the same author is Crisis of the Modern World. I'd highly recommend reading those two books slowly. I'd also recommend, as I often do, reading Jacques Ellul, that's Ellul, both of his books, The Technological Society and also Propaganda, The Formation of Men's Attitudes. That if people are interested in, I think they would do well to read those 4 books. Both happen to be written by Frenchmen, but they're good books to read. To go back to your point about trying to help people, you're not going to. This isn't an elitist thing. It's people choose. Everyone actually has a choice, and most people choose to follow what they follow. The way I see things is slightly different in the sense that I look at it in terms of and why I'm not able to assimilate with this satanic system is because I just think it's a very bad investment. In part of my work, I worked around people who were extremely wealthy, and I mean, I worked with them directly as direct clients. I've flown all over the world. I've stayed in the best hotels and all of that. And I'm not saying these were terrible people or evil people or bad people. It all seemed very flat and empty to me. Not in some sort of that they're all, spiritually sick or something. No, it's nothing to do with that. I just thought, is this it? Is this what everybody's apparently wants? It compared to the garden, I just don't. For me, I want the garden. I want a high rank, clear conscience, and a great reward. Then, and if you look at this world, and it's getting more and more that way. Its prizes aren't worth anything. If I'd lived 50 years ago, I might quite conceivably have worked in the university. I think I've got something to share. I think I've got a way of explaining things that might be useful to some people. I couldn't work in a university today. I wouldn't be allowed in. So that's close to me. Or a published author going, the normal route, that's close to you. If you look at the people who win the prizes now, what they're really getting is obedience prizes. That's all they're being rewarded for, whether you're talking about the Oscars or the Nobel Prize. Generally, if you look at I recommend people do it. Look at who's won the Nobel Peace Prize for the last 20, 30 years. It's a mixed bag, but quite a lot of mass murderers in there. I mean, people like Tony Blair, I think Henry Kissinger, Barack Obama, who destroyed Libya. So these are the people that they reward. And then if we look at the people who, like Ursula von der Leyen, and who's running the EU, or Joseph Borrell, and all these people, I don't want what they've got. What they've got is no use to me. Their job is to lie and all of that, and it's not even a moral. They just feel pusillanimous, empty, and sterile. And also, if Casey and people haven't noticed, we're on the brink of Armageddon right now. Russia is a nuclear power. They're prodding Russia. We're at a more dangerous state than we've ever been ever. I just don't see that running after mammon is a good investment right now. So that's the way I see it. Each day gives you a certain amount of capital. You invest it in the way that you invest it. That's the way I see it. So you're not going to be able to. I don't argue with people. I don't. I haven't got time. I do my work, because people will suck. One thing I learned pretty early, and I'm going to say this to you because I think it's I think it might be of some use to you moving forward, is when you do sort of work like this, you have to be very, very clear. There's 7 billion of them and 1 of you, and your only asset and resource is your own intelligence, time, and what you do with those things. So you have to be laser focused and not allow yourself to be distracted by everyone's got a question. Everybody, watch for the word just. It'll be in the email. Yep. Could you just translate your work into Serbo-Croat by Tuesday afternoon? Could you just explain to me something you've explained 400 times before? Could you just, what the just thing? In fact, it'd be a good idea to have a filter on your email which picks up the word just and puts it straight into spam. That will simplify your life right there. And people will accuse you of all kinds of things just because that's what they kind of do.
Oh, tell me about it. Unbelievable.
Because you don't want to engage with everybody who comes along. So let's put something on the screen. With everybody who comes along just because they've got an opinion. Maybe it's the great opinion. Maybe it's the best opinion that ever existed. But bring your work. And when you get to that, bring your work. I'm quite happy for people. If somebody goes through my work and produces something superior, great. Honestly, I would be flattered that I'd managed to stimulate the person who'd come up with the ultimate work. This isn't a matter of vanity for me. I was filling a space that wasn't filled. I was just doing something that nobody else had done. And if somebody can take those principles and improve them and make them, make it better and, perfect, I'll read your work, not mine. This isn't about, Sam Gerrans. It really, really isn't. But this question needed answers. And so anyway, that's the way I approached it. And I do ignore people. I have to, because if I didn't, and people say, oh, Sam Gerrans, I sent him an email. What you'll get, I'm sorry, man, I was kind of jumping around here, but if you've done, let's take my work on, for example, the mysterious letters, for example, it's a three-dimensional jigsaw puzzle or three-dimensional crossword puzzle, where you not only have to work out the shape of the crossword puzzle, but actually infer what the questions are and supply the answers and prove that you were correct. It's a complicated thing. It just is. If it weren't, it would have been solved before now. But you'll get, oh, Matt, hey, bro, can't you just break it down to like a 5-minute video? No, I can't. I wish I could, but I can't. So when you do work like that, you realize you're only really writing for a tiny number of men who are and they tend to be men, who are going to go through the work and verify it. And it doesn't mean if you don't understand Sam Gerrans' work on the mysterious letters that you're some way deficient, but it's there if people want it. And for me, it was a major thing, because it proved to me that the Quran, beyond a doubt, the Quran is from God and preserved. The things that it claims and susceptible to reason, it claims those things. It fulfills those things to my satisfaction. And for me, that's what I'm really talking about. For my satisfaction, not for the satisfaction of somebody who's from any other background or doesn't want to do that, what I call due diligence. So if somebody reads my work, what they're really doing is getting my evidence for what I've done, my own process of due diligence and my findings. I'm not insisting upon them. I'm not pushing them on anybody. I'm not here to be anybody's mullah. I wanted to know. I spent 10 years. And now I know, and I'm very grateful. And if anybody wants to take that work, they can download it for free and print it off. And that's the end of it. Thank you very much. Goodbye. But to go back to your point, I'm absolutely not trying to convince a lot of people. It's never going to be that way. I'm a medieval man, essentially. I believe in quality, and I'm not interested in the rest, because the rest will follow. If the elites, let's just play sort of fantasy football here. If the elites, okay, we can adopt this and blah, blah, blah. And perhaps it is in our interest to make everybody righteous. They would be righteous pretty quickly, because
it would just take one multinational marketing campaign, and everybody would be against sodomy, usury, and pornography.
I mean, we saw how quickly they adopted the Snowvids, as you call it, thing. We're not guessing anymore. We know that the vast majority of people are utterly compliant and obedient, and I don't say that that's a bad thing. My argument isn't with them. I don't bother arguing with them. I argue with the elites. That's what my work is directed to them. I'm not interested in I'm interested in the organ grinder. The monkeys have no interest to me whatsoever. None. That's the way I go at it, and this is an unusual approach.
It's true. It's kind of like why are people shocked that swine eat their own shit or roll around in their own shit? It's like they're going to do it, and I agree with you. There's no point in argument. It's like, why does a stallion charge into battle and swine eats its own shit? I've got a few notes here. They all kind of tie into, I think, the conclusion that we're both going to simultaneously. I'm glad you brought up what we were talking about earlier with the whole like make it a meme and people always trying to get your attention. And I've always found that funny, because once I kind of understood that, you were saying these people sell their souls for things that aren't particularly very interesting, and even money in and of itself, it's a piece of paper it's not even money, it's a currency backed by nothing, which isn't even backed by anything, because it's debt as well. And it's like, I've always found that, and I had this joke, with my friend, it was like the devil he comes to you and he's like, "Hey, do you want this girl because she has a bit of fat above the back of her legs, and would you like paper which isn't real?" It's like, well, if that's all you've got, I'm not particularly interesting, and I'm not going to go from a tire. I'll keep this really short, but once you kind of understand how linear time works, you never get to indulge. Like, indulgence doesn't exist. Say, for example, you had the most indulgent thing you could do, and you took heroin, like we said, and you had unaudited access to 10 supermodels, and you ate KFC all day and drunk Mountain Dew. You do that for 10 days straight. The second you're done, if you slip and hit your head coming out the shower, do you get to go back in time and pull those indulgences and give it to you now and make it feel better? No, and you wouldn't even have cared that you did it for the last 10 days because we exist in linear time. So it's all very pointless. So when Sam makes those claims like, if someone came along and did better work than me, I'd be happy. I understand that isn't a superfluous or disingenuous statement. It's a fact. Once you start to understand, like, see the world in a particular way, kind of like piercing through the matrix, which Alan Watt without an S spoke about, like, you can't really go back to it. But this is coming to like the penultimate question that I had, and I think we're going to conclude on the same answer here. But let me quickly double check. So last point with that is that the attention is the number one currency, and I would argue in all of human existence. I have an analogy that, like money, gold in a bank is money, fiat is a representation. It's the currency that circulates to represent. So I would say that your attention, human attention, is the value. It's the money, and the time you spend is the currency which flows. When you say you pay attention, it's commerce. You're paying attention with a commodity, and your attention is the number one commodity in human history. I know it seems like I'm diverging, but this ties in exactly to the question I'm going to ask. These people control the infinite supply of all currency, all money, everything. They've dictated the history. The calendar you're on is fake. The cosmology you have is fake. Even things as from the second you're born, women are not meant to give birth on their back, and you're not meant to cut the umbilical cord. But everything is inverted in the opposite. You look at the sun. You think the sun gives you cancer, so you put sunglasses on, block your retina, and then you pour chemical. Like, everything's inverted. But even then, the fact they still have marketing, media, psychological operations, and the news pumping into everyone's home 24/7. If they could just kill you, they would have done it already.
Yes.
So that kind of, to me, validates the hypothesis that comes from the Quran, which is Satan can't just strike you with lightning. He can't just drop a tree on your head. You have the direct dominion over that realm, which is why they rebelled. So the proof is in the pudding. That's why they still have the media. They can't just do it to you. The Rothschild can't put a gun to your head and tell you to take an interest loan. They have to call you a Mercedes-Benz. Would you like this girl? Would you like that? And then you do it yourself. And this is the question I'm coming to: is, do you think it's done? Because there's kind of, to me now, there's two camps starting to separate. And I mentioned that I'm very close with Owen. I don't even know if I can say his full name because he's so unbelievably banned. Owen, he's a Benjamin man. And there's that kind of separation where he is of the opinion that, you know what, it's a test, and I think he thinks we're gonna come into a golden age, kind of like a Kali Yuga sort of thing. We come out of that, and I'm really more of the opinion that I think it's just done. I think it's over. I think it's the tyranny is too perfect, and I think on the micro you could be fine, but once they bring out a public ledger, digital currency that's tracked and everything's logged on the internet and you can switch your bank, like, I think that's pretty much done. And all the men are castrated from pornography. No one's armed, etc., etc. What do you think's going to happen over the next 50 years? Do you think it's just, what do you see? Any light at the end of the tunnel, or?
Yeah,
what
very,
do you think
very bright
protocol?
one.
What do you think your individual protocol to combating it is?
Well, I can't put a timeline on anything, but the Quranic position, what I found by applying this same basic hermeneutic mechanism to the Quran, is that it holds a recipe. If you look at each of the messengers of warning, they go to their respective people. They don't go to the people. They usually go to the elites and warn those elites. And the way it works is this: is they warn the elites reject. and then that society gets destroyed. Well, Muhammad in the Quran, he says, oh people, oh mankind, I'm the messenger of God to you all together. He's the only time that anybody ever says that. And so that means that he's the messenger of God to all of mankind. Well, when in human history has mankind all spoken one language? Is that language Arabic? Well, actually, no, it's not. It's English, isn't it? And so I realized, actually, I think, I might have been the man for the job after all, given that English is my native language, even though I didn't grow up speaking the holy language of Arabic. Actually, nobody grows up speaking Quranic Arabic. It's all a bit of a bait and switch. But anyway, leaving that all to one side, the way that I see it is that the ruling elite, I'm not against there being a ruling elite. To me, it's axiomatic that there must be a ruling elite. What's happened is I do go a long way with the collapse, the involution of the castes, which is what we have. We've moved from where there was a kind of a Brahmin kind of religious class, and they've moved down into what was this sort of knightly class, and now they've collapsed into what we have now, which is sort of tyranny of merchants and the merchant class, and then after that we're collapsing down into the Sudra class. And so we're told that we're progressing. We're not progressing at all. We're absolutely collapsing. I mean, okay, you have an iPhone, but that doesn't mean that you're civilizationally ahead of where people were 1,000 years ago. I don't believe that is the case. It's not that I have some sort of great hankering for the past exactly, although I do think things were in some ways better. But I do agree that technology, technique, as Jacques Ellul would say, technique. I do recommend reading this book. Has some benefits, good dental treatment, for example, one or two other bits and pieces. But on balance, I agree with you. If they wanted us dead, they would just kill us. But let's face it, they did manage to do quite a few people in the last few years with the Snowvid rollout. But they also have wars and all of that where they get rid of. I mean, they're currently committing what would you call it? A genocide. Yes, in two places.
Genocider, yeah.
Genocider, that's the one. Yes, in Ukraine and also in the Middle East, but they do it on a regular basis. I'm 56. I've seen them commit that all over the place. So they like their big sort of culls, as it were. But the conclusion I came to is that the future they've got designed is so awful that the apocalypse is a win. Now, I know that's going to sound radical to most people, but that is my view. Do I find it easy to eat the conclusions of my own philosophical thinking process? No, I don't. I'd be a psychopath if it were easy. It's not easy. It's very, very, very difficult. But I came to the view that actually letting for the end not to come is worse than what they've got planned. And I agree entirely that what they do is I realized in the Quran that there were these processes, protocol, as in the Miranda rights. When they read your Miranda rights in American films, so you have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in the court of law. Blah 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 blah. This shifts you from one legal geography to another. Once that's been said, your status before the law changes. Now, why do they do that? Well, they do that because it works. But nobody, and the elites always warn you. They warn you through mass films. They warn you. You read the small print. They're always warning you. They'll always tell you. They ask for your consent. You must give your consent. So all I did was realize, well, you know what? What's sauce for the goose is sauce for the gander. Why does nobody ever use it against them? And so, having read the Quran extremely carefully, I realized that it holds within it quite clearly, natively, basically a protocol. And so what I did was identified that protocol and directed it to the people who are the elites, not because I'm calling them to throw open the doors and let the whole polloi in so that they can join them at the high table. No, perish the thought. But because these people are themselves collapsing, they've collapsed down from a high caste to what is essentially a money-grabbing little parody of what was actually a righteous merchant class. That's what they are, and they have completely reneged on their obligation to exercise noblesse oblige with relation to the masses whom they rule. So that's all I did, is to hold them to account. I'm not interested in trying to run around after tens of millions of people who don't want to listen. I listened. I did with these people, and so having distilled this, you see, my site, my work, it's there to be read if they want it. I called, but you chose not to follow. This is the evidence. When they warn you, you can be certain that there's a huge online library of stuff that you could have chosen to read to understand. Like, for example, Black's Dictionary of Law or whatever it is. It's all there, but you didn't read it. You didn't do that. Whose fault's that? Oh, it's your fault. You see, all I'm doing is applying that. Now, my work, the Quran, the Complete Revelation, is the legal basis as an entire book for this thing. The work on the mysterious letters proves that this book is fixed and right from God. And the God protocol is the execution of that. Now, the fact, and those are available to the elites at any time for free in the world language that everybody speaks. They all speak English. And the fact that they don't take it, that's on them. It's not on me. And so my position is, do I know when this is happening and that happening? No, I don't. Nor did the recipients of the Quran. He said, I am with you waiting. And it's quite clear from the Quran that whichever was the original society to whom Muhammad was warner was destroyed. I mean, it can only be that way. I mean, we can get into, but because that's the pattern. This is the great tradition he was following. And all I've done, I don't claim to be anybody. What I do claim two things. I claim to be a student of the Quran, and I claim to be able to read a book with my mind engaged. I make those two claims. I mean, that might sound, really, really arrogant. I don't care. Those are my two claims, and that's the sum total of those claims. Maybe I'm just a crazy white guy who's read the Quran and spent too much time on it. Who knows? But you won't know unless you go through my evidence, and that's really what this is about: bringing evidence. And what I've done is essentially warned. And I'll just quickly tell you the story. When we'd finished this work and the God protocol was complete, it was online. We actually, my wife and I, we have summary letters to send to the elites. I didn't send them to prime ministers. I sent them to bankers and people at the top of universities, the people who really stand behind this. And we sent over 900. It cost thousands to do this from where I live in Russia as registered mail. They can't deliver it unless they've got a signature. And so I have the receipts that these people, most of them got there. They can claim whatever they like. I have the receipts. I can prove that they received this, that they were, that they.
And by the way, for people listening, sorry, for people listening, I've went through the list. Well, it's a huge list. Like you said, there's over 1,000 people. The names on that list are not like nobodies. These are like the big guys because I went through on a. Because remember the link thing that I made, I went through. I was flicking through. These aren't these aren't nobodies or imposters that they're sending the letters to. Like, it's not someone in Sam's comment section going like some nobody. These are the big guys they're sending these letters to, and like you said,
it's not Rishi Sunak. He's not the frontman. It's the people behind all of this. And so they can, and including people like, when she was alive, Queen Elizabeth II and George Soros and these sorts of people. Anyway, there's just this moment where we have this mountain of envelopes in our kitchen, and I just look at my wife. You've got these names, Queen Elizabeth II, Prince Charles, whoever it is, the Queen Beatrice of Holland, and owners of Fiat and all of these things, and you just think, if they didn't come from me before, this is probably going to do it. I don't know. Although I must say, I do think, if I'm understanding them correctly, they respect people who stand up to them. They do respect those people. It's the people who obey them that they despise. And you have to say they kind of have a point. Well, that's how it seems to me anyway. But anyway, this was done. It's warningtotheelites.org. It's just basically a list of all the people who received that message, what message they received. And unfortunately, because it's it was Russian Post. I can't remember why. I think you. Why can't you see it? Yes, because it was actually went through. There are links to the Russian Post system which prove that they received these things. Now, because of sanctions, for some reason, I don't think you can see that outside of Russia, but inside Russia, you can definitely see it. And if somebody's got a VPN which can kind of spoof being in Russia, then you can see that too. It's all there. But that was done. They've been warned, and my position as of now is I'm waiting. I'm with you waiting. Just that's it. I have no just like all I'm doing is this to me is what following the messenger is. This is what he did. Well, that's what I'm doing. You know, that's all there is to it. So my position is I am now with you waiting. That's it. And I can summarize this and quite quickly, but believe me, I went through the tortures of the damned to come to this, because if I'm right, if the Quran is true, which I now know enough to be frightened to doubt it, okay, because I've done enough study, then this is right. And if this is right, and this, does what it says it does, then, the consequences as a reasonably intelligent man are absolutely obvious to me. But I would never have done this, press this detonator, if I weren't absolutely certain that the alternative is worse. Because the alternative is our children being brutalized by these Satanists and having their souls extracted. I have children, and I would, this isn't acceptable. And so the only way out of it is if the elites repent and do something differently. That's the only way out of it. Alex Jones isn't going to save us. A million man march isn't going to save us. 20 billion likes on Instagram isn't going to save us. No, that's all. I'm not saying they're bad people or anything, but it's if you keep doing the wrong thing, it doesn't matter how many times you do it, it won't make any difference. The Quran contains one protocol, and it says, ذلك الكتاب لا ريب فيه هدى للمتقين. This is the book about which there is no doubt. There's a guide to the righteous, to those who fear God. Okay, well then, what's the thing it's pointing you towards? Well, he says, I'm just a messenger, like all the other messengers. So you read that and you think, okay, well, what was he actually doing? I'm a warner, like the former warners. Okay, so how did he warn? And you find that they all did exactly the same thing. And all I've done is take that as a student of the Quran and apply it in a world society, remembering that Muhammad was he was a messenger to you all, to all mankind. I've taken his message and understood that that's what it is, and applied it, detonated it on the basis of that, given that we live in a one world society, essentially, where everybody basically believes the same thing. Doesn't matter if you live in Russia, Mongolia, I've been all over the world. Everybody wants an iPhone, okay? That's the religion. So it doesn't make any difference. And all I've done is apply that. And that's the kind of the crux and the purpose and the point of the whole thing, because the alternative is so much less. So to finish up, all I want to say is that for me, what I want is I want the garden. And as far as I'm concerned, whether I don't care what people say from other sources, the Quran says that the end comes like that. It comes suddenly. All this stuff about the Dajjal and the Mahdi and all this. And that. Show me it in the Quran. Well, you can't, because it's not.
Have both.
There. It's not there.
You can't
it's
have
not
both.
There.
Yeah.
And he said, and they ask thee about the end, when it will come. What is that to thee? You don't know this. The recipient of the Quran, that narrative is totally different to what you find in these other stuff. So that's the long and the short of it, and that was what I set out to do. That's why I did not allow myself to get distracted by many, let's say, well-meaning people. I've had people from other, Quran alone movements. Oh, why don't we all get together and sing Kumbaya and it will be so happy? And and I don't respond, not because I'm better, but because I have limited resources.
If you had to stop for every barking dog, you'd never reach your destination. That's it.
Very, very well said. And I don't want to liken them to barking dogs. Maybe they're wonderful, intelligent human beings from whom I would have benefited. Maybe that's true. But I don't have time because I'm focused on this. And to go back to quite a lot earlier in our conversation about, you know, deciding to move to Spain and so on, and that singularity of purpose and the clarity of vision, it made decision making absolutely clear. And I want to repeat what I didn't quite manage to finish up with saying, which was about my wife, is that when I presented to her in, I suppose, in sort of embryonic form, this is what I want to do rather than making a good living for my family, she said yes. She backed me at that moment, and it was that was the crucial moment. We together pinned our colors to the mast of, and which, doing something which would necessarily entail throwing a hand grenade into the, as I say, the hornet's nest of the Islamic world, not because I wanted to antagonize people, but because if you challenge what they claim, a book they claim monopoly rights over, and demonstrate that actually this religion is not native to this book, there may be good things about the religion, I don't deny that, but it isn't native to this book. This book is talking about something completely different, or largely different. Then unfortunately, whether one wants it or not, you incur a certain amount of, you know, unpleasantness. And that's basically the story in summary.
Well, we're reaching nearly 3 hours, so I think we'll wrap up there. I'll just give like a quick couple points I wanted to make to sign off very briefly. I am in total agreement with Sam. I'd imagine the majority of this is up on my channel. I'm pretty sure Sam will upload this to his as well, but
Sure.
this one, talking to my viewers specifically here, there's probably going to be a lot of young men watching this, and it can be a very intimidating future to look at. And you'll understand very well. Alex Jones and these guys, I think what happens is there's charisma at the start of a movement, and then once it gets a lot of eyeballs, it kind of just becomes appease the viewer. So when Alex Jones first started out, it was very authentic, very organic. Once you get the viewership and then the sponsorship, you kind of have to create problems where there aren't any there. And you can get into this fear porn state with a lot of people in the quote-unquote truth community. And I'm not doing that. But if you referenced this earlier, when you look at the Soviet Union, which is probably the most commonly known communist society in the world, where again, I'm not trying to make boogeymen here, but Stalin spoke one more language, and it was Yiddish, and his 3 wives were work it out. 60 million people, according to the narrative, died, and the way they died it wasn't peaceful. It was gruesome. And some of the things that you were saying, just through virtue signaling alone, was insane. The reason that these communist collectivist hellholes never last is because they never had a centralized ledger on trade, meaning they can't track and trace all transactions through one public entity. When you look at the blockchain now, that I don't think people understand the magnitude of it, and you can see it's kind of like a massive cymatic pattern. You see, it's like putting together a puzzle. You see, oh, this piece doesn't make, and then eventually it takes up this massive ornate, like honeybee hive sort of structure. You can see it all coming together.
Could I just quickly jump in? I'm very briefly. It's a mistake that many people in the West make. Russia wasn't communist; it was socialist. Just socialist, like that's what it was. Yes, we call it communist, but a Russian would never have called it. It was called the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics. It was a socialism, and that's socialism which is being promoted in the West. And it always kills. It always kills. And it's not like socialism versus capitalism. They're both materialist, absolutely, ideologies. But socialism has to kill because it needs someone to blame for the failures of its ideology. And what they're rolling out is another form of socialism. But I just wanted to say, Russians would never have called it communism. Yeah. Communism was what they were supposed to be going towards. So that was the goal. That was the kind of nirvana that you're supposed to reach one day. But yes, anyway, I'll dip out now. But I just wanted to say that because that's important. So all these socialists, the people who claim to be socialists, look at the killing fields, look at the gulags. That's coming. That's coming. This is unavoidable now. This is unstoppable. It's unstoppable. A couple of years ago, it was a few injections and this, that, and the other. And I'm going to, I don't want to steal your thunder, but I absolutely agree with this, that they've got rid of all the good people out of the police, out of the schools, out of the hospitals. Next time they come for you, what do you think they're doing? You know, this is a plan. I mean, I'm talking to your audience rather a little bit as well here, which I haven't been so much. But this is the choice. It's a bit like I live in Russia now. You get some Russians, not very many, but a few ignorant ones who think there's a choice between a war in Ukraine and no war. No. That's not the choice. The choice is between a war in Ukraine or a war in Moscow where they're bombing, you know, NATO's bombing Russian cities tomorrow. That's the choice. Either it gets won in Ukraine or they lose and they come in and asset strip Russia and turn this back into into bigger slaves than everyone is in the world already. So that's the choice. That's the actual choice. So going back to the God protocol thing, the choice is either between, pressing this button and the end coming. At least it's now it becomes Quranically, it becomes binding. When it comes, who knows? 10 years, 100 years, I have no idea. I don't claim to, but I know that as of this, a couple of years ago, it is binding. There's no way out of this unless the rulers repent and change, which they can do, and they did it once in history, in the time of Jonah. He was the only successful prophet from that point of view. That was it. But you are living under mass propaganda and so on. So what I've tried to present here is a solution that makes sense. And I understand that only 1% of your audience is ever likely to read any of my stuff, and that's fine too. But for those people, I do it for them. I'm only interested in the few, because it sounds terrible, but they're the only people who count. But I'm sure that you have some amongst your audience. Otherwise, I wouldn't be here, sort of thing.
Yeah. No, it's great. I totally agree. It's interesting, and that's I'm not trying to do like a Tony Robbins where he goes, oh, you wanna scale your business and live your dream life? Give me $9,000 now, and I'll teach you. I'm not trying to do that, but like I was saying, what Sam was saying, ironically, we'll definitely cap this before 3 hours because we're 2:52 now. But ironically, what you're saying about the socialism thing, I fell into that trap, and I used to laugh at people for that, because when they go, the mustache man was a fascist, I go, no, he was a national socialist, and the word they didn't even call themselves that. It was Nasak or something. Anyway, what I was going to say is that the reason that these big socialists then trying to move into the pipe dream of communism, the reason it fails is there's no public ledger, pretty much. And with the blockchain, it's called the blockchain. I mean, that to me it's like how they got African or blacks in America to brag about whips and chains. So, I got my new whip and chain. I go, oh really, slave? Are you picking cotton or working at McDonald's? You're whip and chain. I wonder where that comes from. But once they get that, I don't think people understand. I'm not going to get into this video. I'm sure me and Sam do something later on in the future. It will go from every single thing you buy is tracked and traced, backed by absolutely nothing, and manipulated by a group of people who want you dead. So it will go from, you say on a YouTube video, and this happened 5 years ago. You're on a YouTube video, you say, I don't think that you should inject yourself with something designed to kill you. You would get your account banned. Now, what this coming up is now is when you don't send your children to a PDF file, if you can see what I'm on, where I'm going with that. If you don't send your child to a PDF file under the guise and word salad of love has no limits, you get your banking shut off. That's what's coming. Now, I'm in total agreement with you. I think on the macro, it's done. I think on the micro, however, there's plenty of opportunities. And my advice, and I'm far younger than you, but my advice is just claim authority on everything. For example, even say they have this, the difficult part is no one's armed and they're all armed. So what they did is they went, okay, coincidentally, all over the world, every single country on the planet within 10 years, somebody took a gun and shot up a school. Now give us your guns. It's very convenient, isn't it?
Sure.
But you still have things like allodial title. You still have things like coming off of maritime admiralty law, and I'm not suicidal. I would never kill myself. And when I fly on planes, I like planes that stay in the sky. So in case I go missing, but you can do little things to get off this. I mean, if you look at the Amish, you look at property tax. I mean, all tax, in my opinion, I don't see how people don't see through it. It's insane. It's just stealing. It's to tax you, the verb to tax. That's all it is. But you look at the Amish, they don't pay property tax because they have a allodial title. registered as a church, so they get so there's all these little loopholes around it. But just I think the conclusion that I would take from this conversation and from our talk on the Quran and what's coming in the future is the Quranic narrative that you will only be held accountable for what you do in this temporal realm. And I would say my conclusion and how you do that is you take authority and you take responsibility and you project your authority out onto the world. So just because you don't have, say they roll out a CBDC and they go, if you don't say that child sodomy is beautiful, we're going to deduct 25 Fed coins from your digital wallet. That doesn't have authority over you. The number on the screen doesn't have authority over you. You have authority over the number on the screen, and it may seem painful at first. You may have to sacrifice a lot. You may have to give up a lot of vices. You may have to divide down and harness your attention on things that matter at that time. But it'll work out in the end. And like I said, you will only be held accountable for what you do. But yeah, that's probably all I have to say.
You pay your money and you take your choice. Every road is a choice, and you if you take that choice, there are consequences. People don't like consequences, but they exist. Cause and effect. If you serve the shaitan, then you take his money and then you pay his prices. If you serve God, then it's the same. It's but who do you want to serve? And you can't serve both. It's unavoidable. The only thing I think that I would say about what you've talked about is that I think that really what he's doing is sort of, I decided to take the fight to them rather than the kind of running away and living in the mountains thing. Going back to when we were in Spain, what worked in the past? How were they defeated in the past? How was it destroyed in the past? And applying the same thing. If there was any alternative, I would take it. But I was left with no choice. This isn't heroism or recklessness. It's a complete absence of choice, because the alternative is so much worse. But anyway, I think we should leave it there. We've imposed your audience's attention for long enough. I just want to say for myself, thank you very much for inviting me.
It's been a pleasure.
And I would be very happy to come on again and perhaps hear your story, because I think that would be interesting for young men of your generation to hear from somebody who's clearly taken a stand. And I know it never comes cheap, but it does have its rewards. And I think if you would like to do this again, I'd be certainly very interested.
Sam, you don't even have to ask me. I'd be more. I'm not kidding. Again, not blowing smoke up anyone's arse. You're saying earlier. You get isolated. I'm bored. I feel sometimes borderline schizophrenic. An idea will pop into my head, and I'm on my phone writing, just trying to keep it on. And I never talk to anybody. So when I finally get to talk to a guy like you, I'm like a bull in a china shop. So I think, we'll do this again. We'll definitely do this again. Even just the topic of the taking the fight to them. I could do an entire 4-hour stream on that. That's exactly my mindset, and I've had that shift very recently as well. So that'll do for today. We've just wrapped up 3 hours. So that was great fun. That was Sam Gerrans, everybody. If you want to find his stuff, we'll leave the all his links below. You can go through all his work and everything we discussed here. So hope everyone enjoyed that. If you didn't, just leave and go watch a soap opera or something. I think your time in this world's wrapped up. So okay, everybody, take care. Goodbye.